Ma'am, this section is for first-class passengers only. Economy boarding will begin in approximately 20 minutes. The words sliced through the ambient hum of Global Elite Airlines' premier cabin. Dr. Amara Okafor stood at the entrance to first-class boarding pass in hand, her expression calm despite the immediate dismissal. The flight attendant, blonde, mid-40s, with a practiced smile that didn't reach her eyes, blocked her path with the subtle confidence of someone accustomed to being the gatekeeper. Amara adjusted her simple linen dress and responded with measured precision. "I'm aware. I'm in seat 1A. She extended her boarding pass toward the flight attendant, whose name tag read Sophia Whitfield. Sophia's eyes flickered down at the document, then back up at Amara with barely concealed skepticism. At 38, Amara had grown accustomed to these moments, the quick assessments, the assumptions, the invisible barriers that materialized despite her credentials. As a Yale-educated economist with a reputation in international development circles, she had navigated boardrooms and global summits where she was often the only black woman present. But that didn't make these encounters any less exhausting. The first-class cabin gleamed with subtle luxury. Cream leather seats reclined generously, each with its own private cocoon of space. Crystal glasses awaited champagne, and the scent of sandalwood hung in the air, a carefully engineered atmosphere of exclusivity. Passengers already settled in their seats glanced up, some with undisguised curiosity, others pretending not to notice the exchange at the entrance. "Did you receive an upgrade or perhaps win a contest?" Sophia asked, her tone suggesting this was the only plausible explanation for Amara's presence. "No," Amara replied evenly. "I purchased this ticket 3 weeks ago." She maintained her composure, though something inside her tightened the familiar coil of being forced to justify her existence in spaces others entered without question. Her designer carry-on, the only outward sign of her financial status, hung from her shoulder, its subtle logo apparently insufficient to override Sophia's perception. "Let me just double-check our system," Sophia said, tapping on her tablet with perfectly manicured nails. "There have been so many booking errors lately." From the corner of her eye, Amara noticed a man in 2C watching the interaction over his newspaper. An older white couple in 3A and 3B exchanged whispers. A businessman in a tailored suit averted his gaze when she glanced his way, suddenly fascinated by the safety card in his seat pocket. "I checked in online this morning and selected my seat," Amara explained, though she knew she shouldn't have to. The confirmation came through without any issues. Sophia's expression remained fixed in professional doubt. "Our system can be temperamental. Sometimes it doesn't properly align assignments." The careful choice of words wasn't lost on Amara. Behind them, more passengers queued, creating a bottleneck at the cabin entrance. Amara felt their collective impatience, the weight of being the obstacle, the problem to be solved. "Perhaps you could check again," Amara suggested. "My boarding pass clearly shows seat 1A. Sophia's smile tightened. "Of course. Let me get my colleague to assist." She turned and beckoned to another flight attendant, a Hispanic man in his mid-30s with an expertly groomed beard and the same crisp uniform. His name tag identified him as Daniel Martinez. He approached with a practiced smile warmer than Sophia's, but equally professional. "What seems to be the problem?" he asked, his question directed at Sophia rather than Amara. "This passenger believes she has a first-class booking, but I'm not seeing it clearly in the system," Sophia explained. Daniel turned to Amara with a friendly but condescending smile. "Good afternoon. May I see your boarding pass?" Amara handed it to him, keeping her expression neutral despite the growing knot of frustration in her chest. Daniel examined it, then tapped on his own tablet. That's strange," he said, frowning. "Our system is showing seat 1A as already checked in by another passenger." "That's not possible," Amara replied firmly. "I checked in myself through the app 3 hours ago. I selected 1A specifically for the extra space I have work to finish during the flight." Daniel tilted his head sympathetically. "Technology isn't always reliable, unfortunately. Systems can misinterpret inputs. The euphemism hung in the air. Amara heard it clearly. Systems don't misinterpret inputs, people misinterpret others. There's a lovely seat in Economy Plus that we'd be happy to offer while we sort this out, Daniel continued, just until our ground team can clarify the situation. Amara remained still, weighing her options. She could accept the downgrade to avoid making a scene, swallow the indignity as she had done countless times before. Or she could stand firm, knowing it would only escalate the tension. "No," she said quietly. "That won't be necessary. I've paid for this seat and I'll take this seat. If there's been an error, it's not on my part." The tension in the air thickened. A few passengers shifted uncomfortably while others watched with unabashed interest. An older white woman in an expensive cashmere sweater. The passenger manifest would later identify her as Elizabeth Palmer, leaned toward her husband and whispered just loud enough to be overheard. "Standards really are slipping these days, aren't they, Richard?" From the second row, a Hispanic man in his 40s. Miguel Reyes discreetly angled his phone, the recording light blinking red. Whether for protection or exploitation, Amara couldn't tell, but she felt exposed, her dignity on public trial. "I understand your frustration," Daniel said, his voice lowering to a confidential tone. "But we have protocols for seating discrepancies. Perhaps there was confusion during the booking process." "There was no confusion," Amara replied, her tone still measured but firmer now. "I booked first class. I paid for first class. My boarding pass confirms first class. The only confusion seems to be happening right now." Sophia interjected, her patience visibly thinning. "Ma'am, there are passengers waiting to board. We need to resolve this quickly." "Economy boarding will begin shortly. Perhaps that's where—" "Check the manifest again," Amara interrupted, the steel in her voice surprising even herself. "My name is Dr. Amara Okafor. Okafor, Seat 1A. Confirmed 3 weeks ago and checked in this morning." The mention of her title caused a barely perceptible shift in both flight attendants' demeanor, but not enough to overcome their initial assessment. Daniel's eyes narrowed slightly as he tapped his tablet again. "I see a Dr. Okafor in our system, but there appears to be a seating allocation issue," he said, his tone suggesting this was merely an unfortunate technical glitch, rather than what Amara knew it to be a human judgment that deemed her out of place. "Then let's resolve the issue," Amara replied. "I'll wait right here while you do." The standoff continued, neither flight attendant willing to directly acknowledge the underlying assumption that had triggered this entire exchange. Behind Amara, the line of passengers grew their murmurs of discontent, adding pressure to an already tense situation. As Sophia and Daniel exchanged glances, seemingly weighing their options, Amara stood her ground. She had been in this position before at hotel check-ins, at restaurant reservations, at academic conferences, where her name badge was scrutinized more closely than others. The familiar calculus ran through her mind: when to push, when to concede, how to maintain dignity without being labeled difficult or angry. Today, she decided she would not move. "Perhaps we should speak to the purser," Daniel finally suggested to Sophia, a subtle admission that this situation had escalated beyond their willingness to resolve it. "Yes," Sophia agreed quickly. "In the meantime, Dr. Okafor, if you could step aside to allow other passengers to board." "I will not step aside," Amara said quietly, each word precise. "I am a passenger, and I am boarding. Either direct me to my purchased seat or provide a clear explanation of why you cannot." The atmosphere in the cabin had changed. Those passengers already seated were now openly watching their conversations paused. Elizabeth Palmer's husband shifted uncomfortably, avoiding eye contact with everyone. Miguel continued recording discreetly, his expression unreadable. Daniel's professional veneer cracked slightly. "Ma'am, Dr. Okafor, I understand you're upset, but—" "I'm not upset," Amara corrected him. "I'm expectant. I expect the service I paid for and the seat I reserved." Sophia's smile had vanished entirely now. "Perhaps there's been a system error. We'll need to check with the gate agent. In the meantime," came a new voice from behind Amara, deep and assured. "I believe my wife has made her position quite clear." The cabin fell silent. Amara felt a hand at the small of her back, familiar, steady. She didn't need to turn to know it was Alexander. Alexander Reynolds stood a full head taller than Amara, his salt and pepper hair neatly combed, his tailored suit fitting his athletic frame perfectly. At 45, he carried himself with the quiet confidence of someone accustomed to being heard the first time. His expression as he surveyed the scene before him was one of controlled displeasure. "Mr. Reynolds," Sophia stammered, recognition dawning instantly. We weren't expecting you on this flight." "Clearly," Alexander replied, his tone measured but firm. "Otherwise, I imagine you might have treated my wife with the basic respect due to any passenger regardless of who she is or who she's married to." Daniel's tablet nearly slipped from his fingers. "Sir, there seems to be a misunderstanding about seat assignments." "Is there?" Alexander raised an eyebrow. "Because from what I observed, the only misunderstanding was your assumption about who belongs in first class." The atmosphere in the cabin shifted dramatically. Passengers who moments ago had been watching with detached interest now straightened in their seats, some with expressions of dawning recognition, others with barely concealed discomfort. Sophia's face had paled considerably. "Mr. Reynolds, we were simply following protocol for seating verification." "And does that protocol include questioning the legitimacy of certain passengers' tickets while waving others through?" Alexander asked. "Because I entered right behind my wife and noticed several passengers were not subjected to the same thorough verification." Amara placed a gentle hand on Alexander's arm, not to restrain him, but to ground herself in the moment. This wasn't the first time Alexander had witnessed such an interaction, though usually he encountered only its aftermath when Amara recounted it with practiced detachment. Today he had seen it unfold in real time. "Alexander," she said softly, "I have this." He met her eyes, a silent exchange passing between them. He nodded once, stepping back slightly but remaining firmly by her side. "I believe we were discussing my seat assignment." Amara continued, turning back to the flight attendants. "Seat 1A, which I checked into this morning." Daniel swallowed visibly. "Yes, Dr. Okafor. It seems there was a temporary glitch in our system. Your seat is confirmed. Please allow me to show you to it immediately." The transformation was remarkable. Where moments ago there had been obstruction and doubt, now there was eager accommodation. Sophia stepped aside. Her smile returned, but now strained at the edges. "Can I take your bag, Dr. Okafor?" she offered. "No, thank you," Amara replied calmly. "I'll keep it with me." As Amara moved into the cabin, followed by Alexander, the other passengers' reactions ranged from embarrassment to fascination. Elizabeth Palmer suddenly found her in-flight magazine absolutely captivating. Miguel, still recording, offered a small nod of solidarity. Amara settled into seat 1A, placing her carry-on beneath the seat in front of her. Alexander took 1B beside her, his posture relaxed, but his eyes alert as he observed the continued discomfort of the flight crew. "Would you like a pre-departure beverage, Dr. Okafor, Mr. Reynolds?" Daniel asked, his tone now excessively deferential. "Water for both of us, please," Alexander answered before Amara could respond. Once Daniel had retreated, Alexander turned to Amara, his voice low. "I'm sorry I wasn't here sooner." "You're here now," she replied simply. "They should know better." He continued, anger simmering beneath his controlled exterior. "Especially on one of our flights." This was the detail that most of the cabin had now realized, sending ripples of whispered conversation throughout first class. Alexander Reynolds wasn't just any executive. As the founder and CEO of Pinnacle Holdings, he owned a controlling interest in Global Elite Airlines, the very airline whose employees had just questioned his wife's presence in first class. "They'll know as soon as we land that this isn't going to be forgotten," Alexander said, just loudly enough for nearby passengers to hear. Amara touched his hand. "Let's discuss it later." She was acutely aware of the eyes still on them, the spectacle their presence had created. She had experienced these moments often enough to know that the aftermath, the excessive apologies, the overcompensation, could be almost as uncomfortable as the initial confrontation. Daniel returned with their water, placing each glass on a napkin with meticulous care. "If there's anything else I can get for you, anything at all, please don't hesitate to ask." "Thank you," Amara said neutrally. As Daniel withdrew, Sophia approached, visibly gathering her composure. "Dr. Okafor, Mr. Reynolds, on behalf of Global Elite Airlines, I want to sincerely apologize for the misunderstanding during boarding. We strive to provide exceptional service to all our passengers." The emphasis on all wasn't lost on Amara. She nodded acknowledgement without offering absolution. "We'll be addressing this with the crew upon landing," Alexander said. "I'd appreciate it if you would both report to HR immediately after we arrive." "Of course, sir," Sophia agreed quickly, her professional mask barely concealing her panic. "Absolutely." As she retreated to the galley, Amara turned to look out the window, her reflection staring back at her from the plexiglass. She saw a woman composed and dignified, betraying none of the complex emotions churning beneath the surface. The familiar weariness, the anger, the resignation that such encounters were simply part of moving through the world in her skin. "You know," she said quietly to Alexander, "if you hadn't appeared, I wonder how long we would have stood there." Alexander's jaw tightened. "I shouldn't have to appear for you to be treated with basic dignity, Amara." "No," she agreed. "You shouldn't." They fell silent as the remaining passengers boarded. The usual bustling efficiency of the pre-departure routine seemed subdued in first class, with both Sophia and Daniel moving through their tasks with exaggerated care, avoiding eye contact with the Reynolds while performing their duties with newfound precision. Amara took a slow breath, allowing the tension to drain from her shoulders. She had fought and won this small battle, but the victory felt hollow. Recognition of her humanity shouldn't require her husband's name or position. Respect shouldn't be contingent on association with power. As the cabin door closed and the safety demonstration began, Amara noticed Miguel still watching them from his seat, though his phone was now tucked away. He offered a slight nod when their eyes met, a small gesture of solidarity from a stranger who had witnessed her dignity challenged and defended. Amara nodded back, then turned to her window as the aircraft pushed back from the gate. Below-ground crew members moved with choreographed efficiency, unaware of the drama that had unfolded within the cabin. The engines rumbled to life, and Amara felt the familiar surge of acceleration as the plane raced down the runway and lifted into the sky. Beside her, Alexander squeezed her hand. No words were needed. This wasn't their first encounter with prejudice, nor would it be their last. But today, perhaps, would be different. Today might lead to change beyond this single flight, or these particular crew members. Because today Amara decided as the plane banked toward cruising altitude, she would not let this incident fade into the background of her experience. Today she would use her position, and yes, her husband's influence, to address not just what had happened to her, but what happened daily to countless others who lacked her resources and connections. The seatbelt sign dinged off. First class settled into its usual rhythm of quiet privilege. But underneath that calm surface, something had fundamentally shifted. A reckoning had been set in motion, and Dr. Amara Okafor was prepared to see it through. The flight attendants moved through the cabin with exaggerated care, their usual practiced efficiency now tinged with visible anxiety. Sophia distributed hot towels, her smile fixed and mechanical. Daniel arranged each passenger's choice of newspaper or magazine with precision, his normally fluid movements now stiff with self-consciousness. Amara accepted a towel with a quiet, "Thank you," then unfolded her laptop to review notes for her upcoming presentation in Geneva. She felt the weight of stares, some curious, some embarrassed, some still processing the power shift they'd witnessed. Elizabeth Palmer whispered behind her hand to her husband, their voices just low enough to be indecipherable, but their glances making the subject of their conversation obvious. Alexander had opened his tablet to review quarterly reports, but Amara could sense his attention remained partially focused on the crew's interactions with her. His protective vigilance, while comforting, added another layer to Amara's complex feelings about the situation. "Water, Dr. Okafor." Daniel appeared at her side, pitcher poised. "Yes, thank you," she replied, watching as he filled her glass with excessive care, clearly terrified of spilling even a drop. "And for you, Mr. Reynolds." "The same," Alexander replied without looking up from his tablet. As Daniel moved on, Amara felt Alexander's hand cover hers briefly. "You okay?" he asked quietly. She nodded. "I'm fine." It wasn't entirely true, but it was easier than articulating the familiar mixture of emotions these encounters always left her, with the initial shock giving way to anger, followed by the calculation of how to respond, then the exhaustion of maintaining composure while processing yet another reminder of how the world perceived her. From across the aisle, Miguel caught her eye again and gave a subtle thumbs up. The gesture was small but meaningful, an acknowledgement that he had witnessed what happened and stood with her. Amara offered a slight smile in return, grateful for this unexpected allyship. The captain's voice crackled over the intercom, announcing their flight path and expected arrival time. Life on the aircraft continued with its usual rhythm, but beneath the surface currents of tension remained. Halfway through the flight, as meal service began, Sophia approached their row with a tray. Her hands trembled slightly as she positioned Amara's meal. "The grilled salmon for you, Dr. Okafor," she said, her voice overly bright. "And the beef tenderloin for you, Mr. Reynolds." "Thank you," Amara replied neutrally. Sophia lingered, visibly gathering courage. "Dr. Okafor, I wanted to personally apologize for earlier. It was a misunderstanding and I handled it poorly." Amara looked up, meeting Sophia's eyes directly. "Was it a misunderstanding, Ms. Whitfield? Or was it an assumption?" Sophia's polished veneer cracked slightly. I'm not sure what you mean." "I think you do," Amara said calmly. "But thank you for the apology." The exchange was brief but loaded. Sophia's apology addressed the surface incident but avoided acknowledging its underlying cause. It was the kind of carefully worded statement that protected the apologizer more than it healed the harm done. As Sophia moved away, Alexander leaned closer. "That wasn't contrition. That was damage control." "I know," Amara replied quietly. "Real understanding would require her to recognize why she questioned me in the first place." They ate in companionable silence, the quality of the meal lost on Amara as her mind continued processing the incident. This wasn't her first experience with such treatment, nor even the most egregious. What made it stand out was that it had happened on her husband's airline, a company that in theory should reflect his values. After their trays were cleared, Amara excused herself to use the lavatory. As she waited in the small galley area, she overheard Daniel and Sophia speaking in hushed tones. "Can't believe this happened on this flight," Daniel was saying. "Of all the passengers." "I was following protocol," Sophia insisted, though her voice lacked conviction. "When the manifest flags a potential seating issue." "But did it actually flag anything?" Daniel pressed. "Or did you just assume?" They fell silent as they noticed Amara. Daniel quickly busied himself organizing drink supplies while Sophia straightened already perfect napkins. Amara said nothing, but their conversation confirmed what she already suspected. There had been no system error, no double booking, no technical glitch that required verification. There had only been a flight attendant's judgment that someone who looked like Amara didn't belong in first class. When she returned to her seat, Alexander could see the shift in her expression. "What happened?" She recounted the conversation in low tones. Alexander's jaw tightened, but he wasn't surprised. "They'll be dealt with," he said simply. It's not just about them, Amara replied. It's about a culture that allows this to happen. Alexander nodded, understanding immediately. This was a familiar conversation between them. The difference between addressing individual actions and addressing the environment that enabled those actions. As the flight progressed, Daniel approached their row again. We'll be beginning our descent soon. Can I offer you anything before landing? No, thank you, Amara replied. Daniel hesitated, then spoke in a lower voice. Dr. Okafor, there's something you should know about the seating assignment. Amara looked up, surprised by this unexpected candor. Your seat 1A was actually manually changed in the system after you checked in, he admitted. The computer shows it was reassigned for crew accommodation, but that's not true. No crew member needed that seat. Alexander set down his tablet. Who authorized the change? Daniel glanced around nervously. I don't know, sir, but it happens sometimes. Certain profiles get flagged for verification. Profiles? Amara asked, though she already knew what he meant. It's not official policy. Daniel continued, his voice barely above a whisper. But there's an unwritten understanding about who typically belongs in first class. Some crew members take it upon themselves to enforce that understanding. Amara felt a cold clarity wash over her. Thank you for telling me. Daniel nodded, looking both relieved and terrified at his own admission. I should never have gone along with it. I'm sorry. As he moved away, Alexander turned to Amara, his expression darkening. This is worse than I thought. No, Amara corrected him. This is exactly what I thought. The only difference is now we have confirmation. Alexander took her hand, his thumb brushing over her wedding ring. When we land, I want you to meet with Victoria from HR. She'll take your statement. And then what? Amara asked. And then we make sure this never happens again. Alexander replied, a quiet intensity in his voice. Not on my airline. Not to anyone. The aircraft began its descent into Geneva. Outside the window, the Alps came into view, their snow-capped peaks gleaming in the afternoon sun. Amara watched them grow larger, thinking about the journey ahead, not just the International Development Conference she'd come to attend, but the larger journey toward addressing what had happened today. As the landing gear deployed with a mechanical thud, Amara made a decision. She would use this incident not just to address two flight attendants' behavior, but to examine and change the culture that had enabled it. She had the position, the expertise, and now the motivation to create meaningful change. The plane touched down with a gentle bump, wheels screeching against tarmac. As they taxied to the gate, Sophia made one final announcement, her voice strained with forced pleasantness. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Geneva International Airport. Local time is 3:45 p.m., and the temperature is a pleasant 21 degrees Celsius. On behalf of Captain Williams and the entire crew, we'd like to thank you for choosing Global Elite Airlines. We hope you've had a pleasant flight, and we look forward to serving you again soon. The irony of her words wasn't lost on Amara. As the seatbelt sign dinged off and passengers began gathering their belongings, she remained seated in no rush to exit the aircraft. Alexander stayed beside her, his presence a silent statement. Through the cabin windows, Amara could see a woman in a sharp suit waiting on the jet bridge, Victoria Hamilton, Global Elite's HR director, already summoned by Alexander's text during the flight. The consequences of today's actions were about to begin unfolding. Ready? Alexander asked as the cabin cleared. Amara nodded, gathering her carry-on. More than ready. As they approached the exit, Sophia and Daniel stood rigidly by the door, their professional smiles brittle with anxiety. Behind them, Victoria Hamilton waited, her expression serious. Ms. Whitfield, Mr. Martinez, Alexander said as they passed. Ms. Hamilton will be speaking with you both immediately. Neither flight attendant responded verbally, but their expressions spoke volumes, fear, regret, and the dawning realization that what had transpired was not going to be brushed aside as a simple misunderstanding. Amara stepped onto the jet bridge, breathing in the slightly stale air, feeling the weight of the incident still with her, but also feeling something new, a sense of purpose, a determination that what had happened to her would become a catalyst for change. Not just for herself, but for everyone who had ever been made to feel they didn't belong in spaces they had every right to occupy. Victoria Hamilton fell into step beside them as they walked through the jet bridge. At 50, with steel gray hair cut in a precise bob and a tailored suit that spoke of efficiency, she carried herself with the confidence of someone who had navigated corporate crises for decades. "Dr. Okafor, Mr. Reynolds," she greeted them formally. "I'm deeply sorry about what happened. I've arranged for a private room where we can discuss the incident." "Thank you, Victoria," Alexander replied. "And the flight crew?" "They'll be interviewed separately," Victoria assured him. "They've been removed from the return flight roster pending investigation." Amara nodded, appreciating the immediate action, but knowing it was just the beginning. As they walked through the terminal, a gleaming expanse of glass and steel, she noticed curious glances from other travelers, some recognizing Alexander from business publications or social media. Victoria led them to a discreet door marked Global Elite Premium Lounge Private Meeting Rooms. Inside, a spacious conference room awaited with comfortable chairs, a polished table, and a view of the airport apron where their aircraft was being serviced for its return journey. "Can I offer you anything coffee water?" Victoria asked as they settled into chairs. "Water would be fine," Amara replied. "Thank you." Once Victoria had arranged for refreshments, she took a seat across from them, opening a tablet and activating a recording app. "With your permission, I'd like to document our conversation. This will help ensure we have an accurate record of events." "Of course," Amara agreed. "Dr. Okafor, in your own words, please tell me what happened during boarding." Amara recounted the incident with clinical precision, from the initial confrontation to Daniel's later admission about the seat reassignment. She described the flight attendants' words, their tone, the implications of their questions. She detailed the surrounding passengers' reactions and the shift in treatment after Alexander's appearance. Victoria took notes throughout her expression, remaining professionally neutral despite the gravity of what she was hearing. "And this isn't the first time you've experienced this type of treatment on Global Elite?" she asked. "Not exclusively on Global Elite," Amara clarified. "This happens across airlines, hotels, restaurants, any space with perceived exclusivity." "But it should never happen on our airline," Alexander interjected, his controlled anger evident in the tightness of his voice. "Especially not through deliberate manipulation of our booking system." Victoria nodded. "Daniel's admission about the seat reassignment is particularly concerning. That suggests an organized practice rather than an individual lapse in judgment." "Exactly," Amara said. "That's what I'd like to address. Not just Sophia and Daniel's behavior today, but the underlying culture that normalized it." Victoria looked up from her notes, meeting Amara's eyes directly. "What are you proposing, Dr. Okafor?" "A comprehensive review," Amara replied without hesitation. "I want to examine patterns of verification, seat reassignments, and complaints related to passenger profiling. I want to know if this is isolated or indicative of a broader issue." Alexander leaned forward. "I support this completely. I want a full audit, Victoria. Every complaint, every incident, every training protocol." Victoria's expression remained professional, but Amara detected a flicker of concern. "That would be extensive and potentially sensitive from a legal perspective." "I'm not interested in what's convenient," Alexander replied firmly. "I'm interested in what's right." Amara placed a hand on his arm, a gentle reminder of her own agency in this matter. "What I'm proposing," she continued, "is not about individual punishment, though that may be warranted in some cases. It's about understanding and addressing the environment that makes these incidents possible." Victoria nodded slowly. "I understand. And to be clear, I support a thorough investigation. I just want to ensure we proceed in a way that doesn't create additional liability. The liability already exists, Amara pointed out. It was created the moment Global Elite employees decided certain passengers should be scrutinized based on how they look. The room fell silent for a moment. Victoria took a deep breath, then set her tablet down. "You're right, of course," she admitted. "I'll initiate a full review immediately. We'll need to involve legal HR training and customer service at minimum. I also want to speak directly with Jonathan Walsh," Alexander said, referring to Global Elite's CEO. "This needs to be addressed at the highest level." "He's already been notified of the incident," Victoria confirmed. "He's expecting your call." Amara considered the path forward. As an economist specializing in development and equity issues, she understood organizational structures and how bias could become embedded in operations. She had consulted for multinational corporations on diversity initiatives before, but never in response to a personal experience. "I'd like to be directly involved in this process," she decided aloud, "not just as the person who experienced discrimination, but as someone with expertise in institutional analysis." Alexander looked at her with a mixture of pride and concern. "Are you sure you're here for the UN conference?" "I am," Amara acknowledged. "But I can make time for this. It matters." Victoria made a note on her tablet. "Your involvement would be invaluable, Dr. Okafor, especially given your background." "Then it's settled," Alexander declared. "Amara will consult on the review process with full access to whatever data she needs." Victoria nodded. "I'll make the arrangements. In the meantime, regarding Ms. Whitfield and Mr. Martinez, let's hear their explanation before making any final decisions," Amara suggested. "Daniel's admission suggests he may be valuable in understanding the broader issue." "Agreed," Alexander said, "though I want them both to understand the severity of what happened." "They already do," Victoria assured him. "Your presence on that flight made that abundantly clear." The door opened as an assistant brought in water and a tray of light refreshments. The brief interruption gave Amara a moment to reflect on the weight of the decision she'd just made. She had come to Geneva focused on her work in international development, not expecting to take on an investigation into discriminatory practices at her husband's airline. But perhaps this was exactly where her expertise was needed most, not just in theory, but in practice addressing real harm in real time. As the assistant left, closing the door behind them, Victoria looked at Amara with newfound respect. "If I may say so, Dr. Okafor, your approach to this is remarkable. Many in your position would simply demand terminations and move on." "Firing Sophia and Daniel wouldn't solve the actual problem," Amara replied. "It might make us feel better momentarily, but without addressing the conditions that shaped their actions, we'd just end up with different people making the same assumptions." Alexander's phone buzzed with a message. He glanced at it, then looked up with surprise. "It seems our incident has already made its way online." He turned the screen toward them. There on Twitter was a post from Miguel Reyes. "Just witnessed blatant discrimination on @Global Elite Air. Flight attendants challenged a black woman's right to be in first class, until her husband turned out to be Alexander Reynolds, the owner of the airline. Flying while black, @Global Elite, shame." Attached was a short clip capturing Sophia's initial confrontation with Amara, followed by Alexander's arrival. The video had already been shared thousands of times in the hour since they'd landed. "Social media moves quickly." Victoria observed her expression tightening. "We'll need a public response soon." "Good," Amara said, surprising them both. "Public pressure can accelerate internal change, but I don't want a generic statement about isolated incidents or not reflecting our values. If Global Elite responds, it should acknowledge the reality and commit to specific actions." Alexander nodded in agreement. "Draft something substantive, Victoria. Run it by both of us before it goes out." Victoria made another note on her tablet. "Of course.
And Dr. Okafor, we should discuss your schedule while you're in Geneva.
When would you be available to work with the team? As they worked out logistics, Amara felt a curious sense of alignment, as if her professional expertise and personal experience were converging in unexpected but meaningful ways. What had begun as yet another demeaning encounter was transforming into an opportunity to create tangible change. By the time they left the meeting room, the framework of a plan had taken shape. Victoria would gather data on passenger complaints and seat reassignments. Alexander would speak directly with Jonathan Walsh about executive commitment to the process. Amara would review training materials and protocols while balancing her conference commitments. In the terminal, they prepared to part ways Alexander to a waiting car that would take him to Pinnacle Holdings' Geneva office. Amara to another car headed for her hotel near the conference center. "Are you sure about this?" Alexander asked quietly as they stood in the terminal. "Taking this on along with everything else?" Amara nodded. "I'm sure. Some battles choose you." He leaned down to kiss her gently. "Call me when you're settled in. I'll see you tonight at dinner." As Amara watched him walk away, she felt her phone buzz with notifications. More shares of Miguel's video messages from friends and colleagues who had recognized her media inquiries already finding their way to her professional email. The incident was taking on a life of its own, growing from a personal encounter to a public conversation. And while part of her wished for privacy, another part recognized the potential in this unwanted spotlight, the chance to address something much larger than one uncomfortable flight. She stepped outside into the Geneva sunshine, resolute in her decision. What had happened couldn't be undone, but it could be transformed into something meaningful, something that might prevent others from experiencing the same treatment. That she decided as she settled into the waiting car would be worth the additional work, worth the public scrutiny, worth revisiting the discomfort of that moment at the cabin door. Because some opportunities for change appeared in unexpected moments, and Amara Okafor had never been one to let such opportunities pass her by. The Grand Hotel Geneva hummed with activity as economists, development specialists, and government officials gathered for the International Conference on Sustainable Development. In a quiet corner of the lobby, Amara sat reviewing preliminary data Victoria had sent overnight, spreadsheets of passenger complaints, seat reassignment logs, and crew incident reports from the past 12 months. Patterns emerged quickly to her trained eye. Complaints about verification issues disproportionately came from passengers with non-European names. Seat reassignments for operational reasons showed statistically significant correlations with certain passenger demographics. Crew incident reports used coded language like passenger suitability concerns and profile verification protocols that had no official definition in the airline's policy manual. The numbers confirmed what Amara had suspected. What happened to her wasn't an anomaly. It was part of an ongoing pattern, invisible to those who didn't experience it, but glaringly obvious when the data was properly analyzed. Her phone rang Jonathan Walsh, CEO of Global Elite Airlines. "Dr. Okafor." He greeted her, his voice carrying the forced warmth of someone in damage control mode. "Thank you for taking my call. I wanted to personally express my deep regret about what happened yesterday." "Thank you, Mr. Walsh," Amara replied neutrally. "I want to assure you that this incident doesn't reflect our values at Global Elite. We pride ourselves on exceptional service for all our passengers." Amara suppressed a sigh at the corporate platitudes. "With respect, Mr. Walsh, the data suggests otherwise." A pause. "I'm not sure I understand." "I've been reviewing your passenger complaint records and seat reassignment logs," Amara explained. "There's a clear pattern of discriminatory treatment that can't be explained by chance or isolated incidents." "I see." Walsh replied, his tone cooling slightly. "Alexander mentioned you'd be consulting on an internal review. I didn't realize you'd already begun." "Time is of the essence," Amara said, "especially with the incident now gaining traction online." Indeed, Miguel's video had been viewed over 2 million times overnight, spawning hashtags and a flood of similar accounts from other travelers. Global Elite's social media team was overwhelmed, their standard responses only fueling further criticism. Yes, well, regarding the social media situation, Walsh continued, our PR team has drafted a statement expressing our regret and commitment to investigating the matter. That won't be sufficient, Amara said firmly. Generic statements about investigating read as stalling tactics to most consumers. Global Elite needs to acknowledge the specific nature of the incident and outline concrete steps being taken. Another pause, longer this time. Dr. Okafor, while I value your input, public communications fall under my purview as CEO. We need to be cautious about potential liability. What creates liability? Mr. Walsh is not addressing the root issue, Amara countered. I'm not suggesting an admission of legal fault, but rather a genuine acknowledgement of the problem and a commitment to meaningful change. Walsh's sigh was audible through the phone. I understand you're upset. This isn't about my feelings, Mr. Walsh, Amara interrupted. This is about a pattern of behavior that impacts countless passengers and creates both legal and reputational risk for your company. Our company? Walsh corrected her, a subtle reminder of her connection to Alexander. And yes, I take that risk very seriously. That's precisely why I'm being cautious. Caution and inaction aren't the same thing, Amara replied. Alexander tells me you've agreed to a comprehensive review. What resources are you allocating to that effort? The conversation continued in this vein for several minutes, Walsh offering reassurances while resisting specific commitments, Amara pressing for concrete actions and timelines. By the end, it was clear that while Walsh couldn't openly oppose an initiative backed by Alexander Reynolds, his support would be reluctant at best. As she ended the call, Amara noticed a woman approaching her table, Caroline Winters, Global Elite's VP of Operations, whom she'd met at company events before. Tall, blonde, and impeccably dressed in a designer suit, Caroline carried herself with the confidence of someone accustomed to controlling situations. Dr. Okafor, Caroline greeted her with a practiced smile. I heard you were here. Do you mind if I join you? Please. Amara gestured to the empty chair across from her. Caroline sat her posture perfect. I wanted to personally apologize for yesterday's unfortunate incident. It's not at all representative of how we do things at Global Elite. Isn't it? Amara asked quietly, turning her tablet to show a graph of complaint data, because the numbers suggest otherwise. Caroline's smile faltered slightly. Isolated incidents can create misleading patterns when viewed without proper context. What context would justify discriminatory treatment, Ms. Winters? That's not what I meant, Caroline backtracked. I simply meant that customer complaints aren't always reliable indicators of actual service issues. People complain for all sorts of reasons. Indeed they do, Amara agreed. But when those complaints show statistically significant correlations with passenger demographics, we need to ask harder questions. Caroline leaned forward, lowering her voice. Dr. Okafor, I understand you're upset and you have every right to be, but I'm concerned about the scope of this review you're proposing. It could create unnecessary disruption to our operations and potentially damage our brand reputation. I would argue, Amar replied calmly, that discriminatory practices are what damage your brand reputation. Addressing them transparently would strengthen it. Our first-class passengers have certain expectations. Caroline continued, ignoring Amara's point. They pay a premium for an exclusive experience. Our crew is trained to maintain that standard of exclusivity. And does maintaining exclusivity include questioning the legitimacy of certain passengers' tickets based on their appearance? Caroline's expression hardened slightly. That's not our policy. Yet it happens routinely, Amara countered. Both the data and my personal experience confirm it. Look, Caroline said, dropping some of her corporate polish.
Every luxury brand faces this challenge. Our passengers expect a certain atmosphere. They're paying for it. We have to balance inclusivity with maintaining the experience our core clientele expects. The implication was clear, and Amara felt a cold anger settle in her chest. And you believe those expectations include not having to share the cabin with people who look like me? Caroline flushed. That's not what It is exactly what you said, Ms. Winters. You've just used more diplomatic language. A new voice joined the conversation. Dr. Okafor, I'm sorry to interrupt. Both women looked up to see a man in his late 30s standing beside their table. His Global Elite ID badge identified him as Luis Mendez, Diversity Director. Mr. Mendez, Amara acknowledged him. Please join us. Caroline's expression tightened further, but she said nothing as Luis took a seat. I've been wanting to speak with you. Luis said his manner professional, but with an undercurrent of urgency. I've been following the incident from yesterday and, well, there's information you should have. He placed a folder on the table between them. This contains documentation I've been collecting for the past 18 months. Passenger complaints, internal memos about passenger profile verification, unofficial guidelines circulated among certain crew members. Caroline stared at him. Luis, what are you doing? My job, he replied simply. The job I was hired to do but have been prevented from doing effectively. He turned back to Amara. For over a year, I've been raising concerns about discriminatory patterns in our service delivery. I've been consistently sidelined, my reports buried, my recommendations ignored. Caroline stood abruptly. This is completely inappropriate. Any internal documents should go through proper channels, not be handed to whom, Caroline, Luis challenged. To the wife of our majority shareholder, to an internationally recognized economist specializing in equity issues, to the passenger who experienced discrimination firsthand on our airline yesterday. Caroline's mouth tightened into a thin line. This conversation is over. Luis, I expect to see you in my office when we return to headquarters. As she walked away, Luis turned to Amara. I apologize for the dramatic entrance, but I've been trying to address these issues for months with no success. What happened to you yesterday is part of a pattern that management has consistently refused to acknowledge. Amara opened the folder, scanning its contents. Internal emails discussing passenger suitability, training materials with coded language about maintaining cabin ambiance, statistics showing disproportionate verification incidents affecting passengers of color. This is exactly what I suspected, Amara said, looking up at Luis. Thank you for bringing this forward. It couldn't have been an easy decision. Luis shook his head. Not easy, but necessary. I was hired to help Global Elite become more inclusive. Instead, I've been used as window dressing while the real issues go unaddressed. That changes now, Amara assured him. With your permission, I'd like to include this documentation in the review I'm conducting. That's why I brought it, Luis confirmed. Use it however you need to. I'm prepared to face the consequences. There shouldn't be consequences for doing the right thing, Amara said. But if Caroline or others attempt retaliation, we'll address that as well. They spent the next hour reviewing the documents together with Luis, providing context for certain items and filling in gaps in Amara's understanding of the company's internal dynamics. The picture that emerged was troubling a culture where exclusivity was prized above equity, where certain crew members were rewarded for maintaining standards that amounted to profiling, and where concerns about these practices were systematically marginalized. By the time Luis left for another meeting, Amara had a much clearer understanding of what they were facing. This wasn't just about 2 flight attendants or a single incident. It was about an entrenched culture that would resist change at every turn. She called Alexander, who was in meetings at Pinnacle Holdings' Geneva office. It's worse than we thought, she told him, summarizing what she'd learned from Luis. There's been systematic suppression of these concerns for at least 18 months. Alexander's voice was tight with controlled anger. I'm not surprised, but I am disappointed.
This happened under my watch in a company I control. Not your fault, Amara reminded him, but it is your responsibility now that you know. Agreed. What do you need from me? Protection for Luis Mendez, for starters. Caroline Winters already threatened him for speaking to me. Consider it done, Alexander assured her. What else? I need the board's full support for a comprehensive review, not just of passenger complaints, but of hiring practices, training materials, promotion patterns, everything that shapes the culture. You'll have it, Alexander promised. I'll call an emergency board meeting for tomorrow. As they finished their call, Amara noticed her inbox filling with media requests, CNN, BBC, major newspapers, all wanting her comment on the viral video and its implications. The spotlight was intensifying, bringing both pressure and opportunity. She sent a brief message to her conference organizers explaining that she would still deliver her scheduled presentation, but might need to adjust her participation in some panel discussions. Then she began drafting an outline for the comprehensive review she envisioned, one that would examine not just individual behaviors, but the structural factors that enabled and rewarded them. By evening, when she met Alexander for dinner at their hotel, her preliminary report was taking shape. Over a quiet meal in a private dining room, they discussed next steps and strategy. Jonathan Walsh called me, Alexander said as they finished their entrees. He's concerned about the scope of the review and potential liability. Of course he is, Amara replied. It threatens the status quo he's comfortable with. I made it clear this isn't optional, Alexander continued. Either he supports this fully, or we'll find someone who will. Amara reached across the table to take his hand. Thank you. But we should be prepared for resistance at all levels. I know, Alexander acknowledged. Change never comes easily, especially when it challenges privilege. As they talked, Amara's phone buzzed with an incoming email, Victoria Hamilton sharing additional data she'd compiled. The evidence of discriminatory patterns continued to mount, painting a picture of an airline culture where exclusivity had become a cover for exclusion. Tomorrow's board meeting will be contentious, Alexander predicted. Jonathan has allies among the directors. Then I'll need to be persuasive, Amara said. Good thing I have the data on my side. Their conversation continued late into the evening, planning and preparing for the battles ahead. This had started with a personal affront, but it had quickly grown into something much larger, a challenge to institutional practices that affected countless passengers and employees. As they finally retired to their suite, Amara felt a curious mixture of exhaustion and determination. The coming days would be demanding, pulling her away from her planned work at the conference, but some challenges couldn't be delegated or deferred. Some battles chose you, and once chosen, you either rose to meet them or you became complicit in the very systems you claimed to oppose. For Dr. Amara Okafor, there was only one acceptable choice. Morning brought a flood of notifications to Amara's phone. Miguel's video had surpassed 5 million views overnight, and the hashtags #1st-Class racism and #Global Elite shame were trending globally. Major news outlets had picked up the story with commentary ranging from thoughtful analysis of discrimination in luxury spaces to sensationalized accounts of the billionaire's wife humiliated by airline staff. CNN had run a segment featuring interviews with other travelers who reported similar experiences on various airlines, including Global Elite. The BBC had reached out for an in-depth interview. Travel industry publications were speculating about the potential impact on Global Elite's reputation and bottom line. It's everywhere, Alexander observed as they watched the coverage on the suite's television while preparing for the day. The company's stock is already down 4% in pre-market trading. Amara nodded, scrolling through her phone. And now there's more. Former employees are coming forward with their own accounts. Indeed, the story had catalyzed a wave of revelations. Former flight attendants described unofficial training about passenger profiling. gate agents admitted to being instructed to apply extra scrutiny to certain travelers upgrading to first class. Customer service representatives shared stories of complaints about discriminatory treatment being systematically downplayed or dismissed. As Amara dressed for the board meeting, selecting a tailored navy suit that projected both professionalism and authority, her phone rang with a call from Victoria Hamilton. "Dr. Okafor, good morning," Victoria greeted her. "I wanted to update you before the board meeting. There's been a significant development." "What kind of development?" "An internal memo has leaked to the press," Victoria explained. "From 3 months ago detailing what they called passenger profile verification protocols for first and business class." Amara felt a cold certainty settle over her. "What exactly does this memo say?" "It instructs cabin crew to verify the tickets of passengers who appear inconsistent with typical first-class demographics, with specific guidelines about what constitutes verification concerns. And the language is coded, but the meaning is clear." "Who authored this memo?" Victoria hesitated. "It came from Caroline Winter's office, though she didn't sign it personally. It was distributed to senior cabin crew on international routes." Amara closed her eyes, briefly processing this information. "How bad is the public reaction?" "Bad and getting worse," Victoria admitted. "Several major corporate clients have already contacted us expressing concern. Our social media team is overwhelmed. The stock continues to fall." "And the board?" "They're rattled. Several directors who were skeptical of your review are now demanding immediate action to contain the damage." "Nothing like a financial threat to change minds," Amara observed dryly. After finishing the call, she briefed Alexander, who was already receiving his own flurry of messages from concerned Pinnacle Holdings executives and Global Elite board members. "This changes the dynamics for the meeting," he noted. "We've moved from convincing them of the problem to managing a full-blown crisis." "The memo confirms exactly what Luis Mendez told us," Amara pointed out. "This wasn't just crew members acting on implicit bias. This was an unofficial but organized policy." They arrived at Pinnacle Holdings' Geneva office 30 minutes before the scheduled board meeting. The tension was palpable as they entered the executive floor, with staff members visibly anxious and whispered conversations stopping abruptly as they passed. Eleanor Blackwood, the formidable board chairwoman, was waiting in the conference room. At 68, with a career spanning banking technology and now aviation, she had a reputation for clear-eyed assessment and decisive action. "Alexander Dr. Okafor," she greeted them, dispensing with pleasantries. "This is a significant crisis. I've reviewed the preliminary data you sent over as well as this morning's leaked memo. The situation is untenable," Alexander nodded. "I agree, Eleanor. We need decisive action, not just damage control." "The other board members are gathering now," Eleanor continued. "Jonathan is resistant to the scale of intervention you're proposing. He has some support primarily from directors with longer tenures. However, the leaked memo has shifted several votes toward your position." Amara appreciated Eleanor's directness. "What's your assessment, Ms. Blackwood?" Eleanor's gaze was sharp and evaluative. "My assessment, Dr. Okafor, is that Global Elite has a serious cultural problem that threatens both its values and its value. I built my career by addressing problems directly, not by minimizing or concealing them." "Then we're aligned," Amara replied. Board members began arriving, their expressions ranging from grave concern to barely concealed hostility. Jonathan Walsh entered last, looking harried and defensive. The room settled into an uncomfortable silence as Eleanor called the emergency meeting to order. "We face a significant crisis," she began without preamble. "One that threatens Global Elite's reputation, customer relationships, and shareholder value. Dr. Okafor will present her findings from the preliminary review, followed by her recommendations for addressing these issues." Amara stood connecting her tablet to the room's display system. With methodical precision, she walked the board through the data complaint patterns, seat reassignment statistics, internal communications, and finally, the leaked memo. What you're seeing is not a series of isolated incidents, she concluded. It's evidence of a pervasive culture where discriminatory treatment has been normalized and even institutionalized through unofficial policies and practices. Jonathan Walsh shifted uncomfortably. While I acknowledge the concerning patterns in this data, I think we need to be careful about extrapolating too broadly from limited samples. Limited samples, Alexander repeated incredulously. The evidence is overwhelming, Jonathan. And now, public, Eleanor added pointedly, which brings us to the more immediate question of how we respond to this crisis. Jonathan straightened his tie. Our PR team has prepared a statement expressing regret for any misunderstandings and committing to reviewing our customer service protocols. That's wholly insufficient, Amara interrupted. Generic statements about misunderstandings will only fuel further backlash. The public has seen the video. They've read the leaked memo. They know exactly what happened. Dr. Okafor is right, Eleanor supported her. We need a substantive response that acknowledges the specific nature of the problem and outlines concrete actions. The discussion grew heated, with board members dividing roughly along generational lines. Older directors worried about liability and advocated for a more cautious approach. Younger ones recognized the reputational damage of appearing to minimize discriminatory practices. As the debate continued, Amara's phone buzzed with an incoming message. It was from Luis Mendez. Check your email immediately. She discreetly opened her email to find a message from Luis with a single attachment, a scanned document titled Customer Experience Enhancement Strategies. What she found inside made her breath catch. I need to share something with the board, she said, interrupting the ongoing debate. She connected her phone to the display system and opened the document Luis had sent. On screen appeared a presentation dated 18 months earlier detailing passenger suitability verification procedures with explicit demographic indicators. The document included specific instructions for maintaining first-class cabin demographics and discrete intervention strategies for profile mismatches. This presentation, Amara explained, was used in training senior cabin crew on long-haul routes. It explicitly instructs staff to apply additional scrutiny to passengers who don't fit certain demographic profiles. The room fell silent as board members absorbed this new evidence. Where did you get this? Jonathan finally asked, his voice strained. From Luis Mendez, your diversity director, Amara replied. The same director who has been raising concerns about these practices for 18 months without receiving adequate response. Eleanor leaned forward. Jonathan, did you know about this training material? I was aware of customer experience initiatives, but not the specific content of all training materials, he hedged. That's not what Luis Mendez says, Amara countered. According to him, he brought these concerns directly to your attention multiple times with documentation and was consistently sidelined. The atmosphere in the room shifted decisively. Board members who had been hesitant now looked openly concerned. Those who had supported Jonathan appeared uncomfortable. Eleanor took control of the meeting again. It seems clear that we're facing not just a PR crisis, but a fundamental failure of leadership and values. Before we discuss next steps, I have a question for Dr. Okafor. Amara turned to the board chairwoman. Yes. You've outlined the problem comprehensively. What specific actions do you recommend? All eyes turned to Amara. This was the moment to translate data and analysis into concrete action. She took a breath and outlined her plan, a comprehensive reform program addressing everything from hiring practices to training protocols, from complaint procedures to accountability metrics. This isn't just about avoiding another incident like mine, she concluded. It's about creating a culture where such incidents are unthinkable. That requires structural change, not just better PR or individual sensitivity training. As she finished, her phone buzzed again, another message from Luis. Caroline Winters is cleaning out my office. Security is escorting me from the building. Amara showed the message to Alexander, whose expression darkened. He stood immediately. "While we're discussing accountability," he said to the board, "I've just been informed that Caroline Winters is attempting to terminate Luis Mendez apparently in retaliation for providing documentation to this investigation." Eleanor's reaction was immediate. "That is absolutely unacceptable. Jonathan, call Caroline immediately and reverse this action. Luis Mendez is to be reinstated immediately with full protection as a whistleblower." Jonathan fumbled for his phone, visibly shaken by how quickly he was losing control of the situation. "Furthermore," Eleanor continued, "I believe we need to place Caroline Winters on administrative leave pending a full investigation of her role in creating and implementing these discriminatory protocols." The board meeting continued for another 2 hours with increasingly detailed discussions of the necessary responses to the crisis. By the end, a clear consensus had emerged, one that supported Amara's proposed comprehensive review and reform program, with full board backing and significant resources allocated to the effort. As they left the boardroom, Alexander's phone rang. "It's Ethan from security," he said, answering the call. His expression grew increasingly concerned as he listened. How many thank you for letting me know." He ended the call and turned to Amara. "Ethan says Amara has been receiving threatening messages through the company's customer service portal people, angry about the changes they assume are coming, blaming you for ruining their exclusive airline experience." Amara wasn't surprised. Challenging privilege always provoked backlash. "Security is monitoring them." "Yes, and they've increased protection at all our properties and events as a precaution." They walked to the waiting car that would take Amara back to the conference center for her scheduled presentation. "Are you sure you want to continue with this?" Alexander asked quietly. "The threats, the public scrutiny, the extra work while you're trying to focus on your own career." Amara met his gaze steadily. "I'm sure. This matters. And I'm exactly the right person to lead it, both because of what happened to me and because of my professional expertise." Alexander squeezed her hand. "I've never been more proud of you." As the car pulled away from the curb, Amara checked her messages one last time. The conference organizers had confirmed her adjusted schedule. Victoria had sent updated data on complaint patterns. Luis reported that he had been reinstated with an apology from Jonathan personally. And there, buried among the professional communications, was a message from Miguel Reyes, the passenger who had recorded the original incident. "Dr. Okafor, I didn't know who you were when I started recording. I just knew I was witnessing something wrong. Thank you for using your position to create change that will help all of us." That, Amara thought as the car navigated the Geneva streets, was why this battle mattered. Not because of one uncomfortable flight or 2 biased flight attendants, but because of all the passengers who faced these indignities without Alexander Reynolds by their side, without the platform to demand accountability, without the power to effect change. For them, she would see this through no matter how complex or challenging the path ahead might be. The hotel conference room buzzed with tension as Amara surveyed the faces around the table. It was an unlikely assembly. Luis Mendez, now elevated to Senior Director of Inclusive Excellence. Victoria Hamilton from HR, representatives from training, customer service, and operations, and a team of data analysts pulled from various departments. Jonathan Walsh sat at the far end, his participation more symbolic than enthusiastic. "Thank you all for being here," Amara began, standing at the head of the table. "Over the past 3 days, we've gathered substantial evidence of discriminatory practices at Global Elite. Now we need to transform that evidence into action." She unveiled the framework she had been developing, a comprehensive initiative she called Respect in Flight, designed to address bias at every level of the organization. "This isn't about sensitivity training or diversity seminars," she explained. "Those have their place, but they're insufficient for addressing institutional problems. We need structural changes that reshape how decisions are made, how performance is evaluated, and how accountability is enforced." The program she outlined was both ambitious and methodical.
It began with data collection, establishing clear baselines on everything from passenger complaints to employee demographics. It continued with policy audits examining every procedure guideline and training document for explicit or implicit bias. It culminated in new accountability systems metrics, reporting structures, and consequence frameworks. The goal, Amara emphasized, is not just to prevent incidents like mine, but to create an environment where such incidents are unthinkable because the underlying assumptions that drive them have been confronted and changed. Luis nodded enthusiastically. This is exactly what I've been advocating for years. It addresses root causes, not just symptoms. Others appeared more skeptical. The training director raised concerns about implementation timelines. The operations representative worried about disruptions to service. The customer service lead questioned how to balance the new protocols with efficiency metrics. Jonathan Walsh cleared his throat. Dr. Okafor, while I appreciate the thoroughness of your proposal, I have concerns about the cost and scope. This would require significant resources at a time when we're already facing market pressures. What would be the cost of not implementing these changes, Mr. Walsh? Amara countered. Global Elite's stock has fallen 12% since the incident. Corporate clients are reconsidering their contracts. The reputational damage continues to grow. She pulled up a slide showing financial projections. Our analysis suggests that failing to address these issues comprehensively could result in revenue losses exceeding $200 million over the next fiscal year. The room fell silent as the number registered. Furthermore, Amara continued, this isn't optional. The board has unanimously approved this initiative and allocated the necessary resources. We're here to discuss implementation, not whether to proceed. Jonathan's expression tightened, but he offered no further objection. The meeting continued with detailed discussions of timelines, responsibilities, and metrics. By lunch break, they had established working groups for each major component of the program and set ambitious but achievable deadlines. As they reconvened after lunch, Caroline Winters made an unexpected appearance. Though officially on administrative leave pending investigation, she had apparently decided to insert herself into the process. I hope I'm not interrupting, she said, taking an empty seat without waiting for invitation. As VP of Operations, I feel I should be part of these discussions. The tension in the room increased immediately. Luis shifted uncomfortably while Victoria exchanged concerned glances with Amara. Ms. Winters, Amara said carefully, my understanding is that you're currently on administrative leave. A formality, Caroline dismissed with a wave. I'm still responsible for operational implementation of any new initiatives. Not this one. Jonathan surprised everyone by stating firmly. The board has been clear, Caroline. Pending the investigation into your role in the passenger verification protocols, you're to have no involvement in the Respect in Flight initiative. Caroline's poised facade cracked slightly. That's absurd. I have 15 years of experience in airline operations. This program will fail without practical operational guidance. We have other operations experts participating, Amara pointed out, including some who haven't authored discriminatory protocols. Caroline's face flushed. Those protocols were about maintaining service standards, not... The language in those documents speaks for itself, Amara interrupted. And this isn't a debate. You're welcome to cooperate with the investigation into your role, but you will not be participating in this program. For a moment, it seemed Caroline might continue arguing. Instead, she stood abruptly. You're making a mistake. This airline runs on efficiency and exclusivity. Your reforms will destroy both. After she left, the room remained tense. Jonathan looked particularly uncomfortable, having been forced to publicly oppose his longtime ally. Let's continue, Amara suggested, returning the focus to implementation plans. By the end of the day, they had established a clear roadmap for the Respect in Flight initiative, complete with timelines, responsibilities, and accountability mechanisms. Luis would lead the overall implementation with direct reporting lines to the board.
Victoria would handle the HR components, focusing particularly on hiring practices and complaint procedures. As the meeting concluded, Jonathan approached Amara privately. "Dr. Okafor, a word." She nodded, stepping aside with him. "I want you to know," he said, his voice low, "that despite my reservations about the scope of this program, I am committed to its success." "Are you?" Amara asked directly. "Because successful implementation will require dismantling systems you've overseen for years. It will mean acknowledging that under your leadership, discriminatory practices became normalized." Jonathan flinched slightly but held her gaze. "I understand that. And while I won't pretend it's comfortable, I recognize that it's necessary. Not just for the company's reputation, but because it's right." Amara studied him, assessing his sincerity. "I appreciate that, Mr. Walsh. Implementation will be challenging enough without leadership resistance." "You won't face resistance from me," he promised. "You have my word." As he walked away, Amara wondered whether his change of heart was genuine or merely pragmatic self-preservation. Either way, his cooperation would make the process smoother. Luis approached next, his expression a mixture of excitement and anxiety. "This is everything I've been pushing for," he said quietly. "But the backlash will be intense. Caroline has allies throughout the company." "We're prepared for that," Amara assured him. "And you'll have protection both institutionally and personally." Luis nodded gratefully. "There's something else you should know. Some of the senior cabin crew are organizing resistance. They're worried about losing the discretion they've always had in first class. Translation, they're worried about losing the power to exclude people based on appearance," Amara observed. "Exactly. They're framing it as maintaining standards, but it's about preserving unwritten hierarchies." "Then we make those hierarchies visible," Amara decided. "Data will be our strongest ally. When we can demonstrate patterns of bias with numbers, it's harder to dismiss as perception or misunderstanding." The implementation team dispersed, each member charged with specific next steps. Amara checked her watch. She had just enough time to return to her hotel and change before delivering her scheduled conference presentation on sustainable economic development in East Africa. The contrast between her planned work in Geneva and the unexpected challenge she'd taken on wasn't lost on her. Both involved structural analysis and institutional change, but the airline project was far more personal and immediate. That evening, after her conference presentation, which had gone well despite her divided focus, Amara met with Alexander for dinner. They chose a quiet restaurant away from the main conference venues, seeking privacy after days of intense public scrutiny. "The program is ambitious," Alexander observed as they reviewed the day's progress, "but necessary. It will face resistance at every level," Amara predicted. "From Caroline and her allies in management to cabin crew who've been trained to think of exclusivity as their primary value." Alexander nodded, swirling the wine in his glass thoughtfully. "Change always meets resistance, especially when it challenges people's sense of status or authority. The key will be showing them that true excellence isn't about exclusion," Amara said. "It's about exceptional service delivered consistently and respectfully to everyone who purchases it. Exclusivity can come from quality, not from discriminatory gatekeeping." "That's a profound shift for a luxury brand," Alexander acknowledged. "The entire industry has operated on implicit exclusion for decades." They continued discussing strategy as they enjoyed their meal, occasionally interrupted by discreet glances from other diners who recognized them from news coverage. By dessert, Amara had outlined her next steps: data collection frameworks, training module revisions, and accountability structures. "There's one more thing we need to address," Alexander said as they finished their coffee. "The ultimatum?" Amara raised an eyebrow. "What ultimatum?" "We need to establish clear, non-negotiable expectations for the executive team," Alexander explained. "Particularly Jonathan. His cooperation today was encouraging, but I'm not convinced of his long-term commitment." You're thinking of formal mandate. More than that, Alexander replied. A clear choice: either fully support this initiative with actions, not just words, or step aside for someone who will. Amara considered this. That's a significant escalation. Are you prepared for him to call that bluff? It's not a bluff, Alexander said firmly. Global Elite needs leaders who understand that inclusive excellence is the future, not an optional program. If Jonathan can't or won't lead that transformation, we need someone who will. The next morning they convened another meeting, this one smaller and more focused. Jonathan Walsh, Eleanor Blackwood, and 3 other key executives gathered in a private conference room at Pinnacle Holdings' Geneva office. Amara stood before them, composed and determined. Yesterday we established the framework for the Respect in Flight initiative. Today we need to address leadership commitment. And she outlined specific expectations for executive involvement, not just approval or supervision, but active participation, regular progress reviews, personal accountability for outcomes, visible modeling of inclusive behaviors. This isn't optional, Amara concluded. Half-hearted implementation will fail, and failure isn't acceptable, not morally, not financially, not reputationally. Jonathan shifted uncomfortably. Dr. Okafor, while I support the initiative's goals, the level of executive involvement you're describing would significantly impact our ability to manage other priorities. That's precisely the attitude that got us here, Alexander interjected. Treating inclusion as separate from real priorities rather than as fundamental to how we operate. Eleanor Blackwood nodded in agreement. Jonathan, Dr. Okafor, and Alexander are right. This isn't an add-on project. It's a core business imperative. I understand that, Jonathan insisted. I'm simply concerned about the practical allocation of executive time and attention. Then let me be clear, Amara said, her voice steady and direct. This initiative will transform Global Elite's culture, policies, and practices. It requires full leadership commitment. If you believe you can't provide that commitment while fulfilling your other responsibilities as CEO, you should say so now. The implication hung in the air. Jonathan looked from Amara to Alexander to Eleanor, assessing the unity of their position. Are you asking for my resignation? He asked finally. I'm asking for your full commitment, Amara corrected. If you can't provide it, then yes, stepping aside would be appropriate. Jonathan's face flushed. After 15 years with this company, I'm being threatened with termination because of one incident. Not one incident, Eleanor corrected firmly. A pattern of discriminatory practices that flourished under your leadership, which you either approved, ignored, or failed to notice. None of those options reflects well on your capacity to lead this necessary transformation. Alexander leaned forward. Jonathan, this isn't personal, but Global Elite is at a crossroads. Either we commit fully to inclusive excellence, or we continue practices that are both morally wrong and increasingly bad for business. The room fell silent as Jonathan considered his options. His expression shifted from indignation to calculation to resignation. I understand, he said finally. You have my full commitment to implementing the Respect in Flight initiative as outlined with my personal involvement in the ways Dr. Okafor has specified. Thank you, Amara acknowledged. We'll begin immediately. As the meeting concluded and the executives filed out, Eleanor lingered behind. That was necessary, she told Amara quietly, and well handled. Will he follow through? Amara asked. Eleanor's smile was knowing. He'll try, and we'll be watching to ensure he succeeds. Over the next 2 days, while balancing her conference responsibilities, Amara worked with Luis and the implementation team to finalize the program's details. They developed training materials that directly addressed bias rather than using euphemisms. They created accountability metrics that tracked service consistency across passenger demographics. They established reporting mechanisms that elevated discrimination complaints rather than burying them. By the end of the week, as Amara prepared to deliver her final conference presentation, the Respect in Flight initiative was ready for launch. The first phase would focus on senior leadership and training staff. The second would expand to all customer-facing roles. The third would incorporate feedback and refine processes based on initial results. When she returned to her hotel that evening, she found Alexander waiting with unexpected news. "Global Elite stock is rebounding," he told her, showing her the financial app on his tablet. "The market is responding positively to the announcement of the initiative." Amara smiled wryly. Amazing how quickly impossible changes become viable when they affect the bottom line. "That's capitalism," Alexander acknowledged. "But in this case, it's working in our favor. The board is unanimously supportive now, even the members who were initially resistant. And Jonathan, fully on board, at least outwardly. He's scheduled a company-wide address to introduce the initiative and emphasize his personal commitment." Amara nodded, satisfied with the progress, but aware that the hardest work still lay ahead. Announcing changes was easy. Implementing them against ingrained resistance would be the real challenge. "There's one more thing," Alexander said, his expression shifting to concern. "Security flagged some troubling messages on social media, people angry about the changes, blaming you specifically." Amara wasn't surprised. Anyone challenging privilege faces backlash. "These go beyond typical online anger," Alexander clarified. "There are specific threats, coordinated harassment campaigns, some from people identifying themselves as frequent first-class passengers who feel their exclusive experience is being threatened. Have security take appropriate precautions," Amara replied calmly. "But I won't be intimidated out of doing what's right." Alexander looked at her with a mixture of pride and worry. "I know. Just be careful." As they prepared for dinner, Amara reflected on how quickly events had unfolded. What had begun as a personal confrontation at a cabin door had expanded into a company-wide transformation initiative that was now attracting both support and threats. The stakes had grown exponentially, as had the potential impact. This was no longer just about one flight or two biased flight attendants. It was about challenging fundamental assumptions about who belonged in premium spaces, who deserved respect by default, whose comfort mattered. And while the intensity of the backlash confirmed the importance of the work, it also highlighted the risks. Change never came without cost, especially when it challenged entrenched privilege. But Dr. Amara Okafor had never been one to back down from necessary challenges. Not in her academic work, not in her economic development projects, and certainly not in this unexpected but vital battle for dignity and respect. The transformation had begun. Now they needed to see it through whatever resistance they might face. The Respect in Flight initiative launched with unexpected momentum. Jonathan Walsh's company-wide address exceeded expectations, with the CEO not only introducing the program but acknowledging his personal responsibility for allowing discriminatory practices to become normalized. Luis Mendez, newly empowered as the program's director, assembled a dedicated team drawn from across departments. Training modules were developed, data collection frameworks established, and accountability mechanisms put in place. Amara split her time between conference sessions and overseeing the initiative's early implementation, while Alexander divided his attention between Pinnacle Holdings's broader operations and supporting Global Elite's transformation. Their hotel suite had become an impromptu command center with video calls, data reviews, and strategy sessions continuing late into each evening. By the fourth day of implementation, Luis reported encouraging progress. "Senior leadership training sessions are going better than expected," he told Amara during their morning briefing call. "Even executives who were initially resistant are engaging meaningfully with the material." "And the cabin crew sessions?" Amara asked, knowing this would be where they'd face the strongest resistance. "Mixed," Luis admitted. "Some groups are receptive, others defensive, but we're documenting everything, including resistance points. That will help us refine our approach." As Amara ended the call and prepared for her final conference presentation, she felt cautiously optimistic. The initial rollout had avoided major pitfalls, and the data they were collecting would provide a solid foundation for the next phase. Her optimism was short-lived. As she returned from her presentation that afternoon, her phone exploded with notifications. Breaking news alerts, messages from Alexander Luis Victoria, calls from unknown numbers, likely media outlets seeking comment. The headline that appeared across her screen sent a chill through her. Global Elite Airlines Respect Initiative, revealed as punitive revenge program. She opened the first news link to find leaked internal documents, training materials, emails, and meeting notes from the Respect in Flight initiative, edited and presented to suggest the program was designed to punish employees rather than transform culture. Phrases taken out of context. Accountability metrics presented as punitive quotas. Implementation timelines characterized as purge schedules. Worst of all, private emails between Amara and Luis had been selectively edited to make it appear they were plotting retribution against specific employees rather than addressing institutional problems. Her phone rang Alexander. "I've seen it," she said immediately upon answering. "It's everywhere," he replied, his voice tight. Someone accessed the secure server where the implementation documents were stored and selectively leaked materials to multiple outlets. "The documents are manipulated," Amara noted, "edited to create a false narrative." "Yes, but the damage is spreading. Global Elite's stock is falling again. Jonathan is being bombarded with calls from concerned board members. The Flight Attendants Union has issued a statement expressing alarm about potential targeted harassment of crew members." Amara took a deep breath, forcing herself to think clearly despite the surge of adrenaline. This is deliberate sabotage. Someone with access to secure servers with knowledge of which documents to target and with motivation to derail the initiative. "I've already ordered an IT security audit," Alexander confirmed. "We'll identify the source. In the meantime, we need to counter this narrative quickly." Amara's other line beeped Luis calling. "I need to speak with Luis. I'll call you back." She switched calls. "Luis, I've seen the news. This is devastating," he said, his voice strained. "The training session I'm currently leading just collapsed. Participants are showing me the leaked emails on their phones asking if we're targeting them for termination." "The emails are edited," Amara assured him. "We need to release the original unaltered documents immediately to show how they've been manipulated." "I've already started that process," Luis confirmed. "But the damage is spreading quickly. The narrative that this is a revenge program rather than a reform initiative is gaining traction." As they discussed immediate response strategies, Amara's tablet pinged with a new email notification from Victoria Hamilton. "Luis, I need to go. Victoria's sending something urgent." She opened Victoria's email to find a preliminary IT security report. The leak had been traced to a specific user credential belonging to James Wilson, Chief of Operations, and a longtime ally of Caroline Winters. The report detailed access logs showing James had downloaded the leaked documents at 2:17 a.m., several hours before they appeared online. The logs also showed that he had specifically searched for communications between Amara and Luis, focusing on implementation timelines and accountability metrics. Amara forwarded the report to Alexander, then called him back. "James Wilson," she said without preamble. "The IT audit confirms it." "I've seen the report," Alexander replied. "Security is securing his devices now, and he's been called to an emergency meeting." "We need to address this publicly," Amara decided. "The longer that manipulated narrative spreads, the harder it will be to correct." They quickly agreed on a strategy. Alexander would handle James Wilson and the internal investigation, while Amara worked with Global Elite's communications team on a public response. Additionally, they would convene an emergency town hall for all employees to address concerns directly. The next few hours passed in a blur of activity. Amara worked with the communications team to prepare a statement that was both factual and transparent, acknowledging the leak, confirming it had been traced to a specific executive, and releasing the original unaltered documents to demonstrate how they had been manipulated. Meanwhile, Alexander confronted James Wilson directly. The meeting was brief and decisive. Faced with irrefutable evidence of his actions, James admitted to leaking and manipulating the documents. His motivation, he claimed, was to protect the airline's culture of excellence from what he viewed as unnecessary and disruptive changes. He was terminated, immediately escorted from the building by security, his access to all systems revoked. By early evening, Amara and Alexander, along with Luis, Victoria, and Jonathan, gathered in Global Elite's Geneva office to conduct the emergency virtual town hall. Over 2,000 employees joined the video conference, with thousands more expected to watch the recording afterward. Jonathan spoke first, addressing the leak directly and unequivocally. "Today, a member of our executive team betrayed your trust and mine by leaking and deliberately manipulating internal documents related to the Respect in Flight initiative. This individual has been identified and terminated, and we are investigating whether others were involved." He continued with unexpected clarity and force. "Let me be absolutely clear. The Respect in Flight initiative is not about punishment or retribution. It is about creating a better, more inclusive global elite where every passenger receives the excellent service they've paid for regardless of how they look, what they wear, or any other characteristic not related to their ticket." Luis spoke next, methodically walking through the original documents alongside the manipulated versions, highlighting the selective editing and misrepresentations. This was a deliberate attempt to create fear and resistance by portraying a culture change initiative as a punitive campaign, he explained. When it was Amara's turn to speak, she kept her message focused and personal. "Many of you don't know me beyond what you've seen in the news. I'm not an angry customer seeking revenge. I'm an economist who specializes in institutional analysis and development. When I experienced discrimination on a Global Elite flight, I saw it not as an isolated incident, but as evidence of institutional patterns that needed to be addressed." She continued with calm conviction. "The Respect in Flight initiative isn't about catching or punishing individual employees. It's about examining and changing the conditions that make discriminatory treatment seem normal or acceptable. It's about creating systems where everyone can do their best work without being asked to participate in practices that ultimately harm both passengers and the company itself." The town hall continued with a Q&A session where employees could submit questions anonymously. The questions ranged from practical concerns about implementation to deeper anxieties about changing expectations and evaluation metrics. Amara, Luis, and the leadership team addressed each question directly and honestly. They acknowledged uncertainties where they existed. They corrected misunderstandings with data and context. They emphasized that the goal was improvement, not punishment. By the end of the 2-hour session, the tension had noticeably decreased. Not all concerns were resolved, but the manipulated narrative had been effectively countered with transparency and direct engagement. As they concluded the town hall, Jonathan made one final statement. "Today we faced an attempt to derail our progress through deception and fear. We responded with truth and openness. That's the culture we're building, one where problems are addressed directly, where manipulation is rejected, and where we move forward together with clarity and common purpose." After the virtual meeting ended, Amara checked her phone to find a message from Miguel Reyes, the passenger who had recorded the original incident. "Just watch the town hall. Powerful response to the sabotage. Stay strong." The support was welcome, especially as other notifications showed the public narrative beginning to shift. News outlets were updating their stories with the revelation of James Wilson's termination and the release of the unaltered documents. Social media conversations were evolving from outrage about a revenge campaign to discussions about the deliberate sabotage of an inclusion initiative. "It's working," Alexander observed as they reviewed the coverage together. "The truth is catching up to the manipulation." "For now," Amara cautioned. "But James Wilson isn't the only one who feels threatened by these changes. This won't be the last resistance we face. She was proven right the following morning when they learned that Caroline Winters had given an unauthorized interview to a business publication characterizing the Respect in Flight initiative as a dangerous overcorrection that will destroy the premium experience our customers expect. Though still on administrative leave, Caroline had leveraged her long-standing relationships with business journalists to position herself as a concerned insider, warning about the risks of excessive inclusion policies. She claimed the initiative would lower standards, alienate high-value customers, and ultimately damage Global Elite's brand position. The interview gained immediate traction in certain circles, particularly among business travelers and frequent flyers who worried about changes to their familiar experience. Comment sections filled with anxieties about declining standards and political correctness over quality thinly veiled expressions of the same exclusionary mindset the initiative sought to address. Rather than responding directly to Caroline's claims, Amara suggested a different approach. "Let's invite these concerned passengers to participate in focus groups," she proposed. "Let them articulate exactly what they value about the premium experience and then show them how none of those things, attentive service, comfort, quality, amenities, require discrimination or exclusion." Alexander agreed, and within 48 hours, Global Elite had launched Premium Experience Dialogues, structured conversations with frequent first and business class travelers about their expectations and values. The dialogues were designed not to debate the initiative itself, but to identify core service elements that mattered most to premium passengers. Meanwhile, the internal investigation continued, revealing that while James Wilson had acted alone in leaking the documents, he had discussed his concerns about the initiative with several other executives, including Caroline. Though none had explicitly encouraged the leak, they had created an environment where such actions seemed justified to protect the status quo. A week after the leak, as the dust began to settle and the initiative returned to its implementation schedule, Amara met with Luis to assess their progress and adjust their approach based on what they'd learned. "The sabotage attempt actually helped us in some ways," Luis observed. "It forced us to articulate our goals more clearly and transparently than we might have otherwise. And it identified resistance we might not have seen until later," Amara added. "Now we know where the fault lines are and can address them directly." They refined the implementation plan, adding more frequent communication checkpoints and creating additional forums for employees to express concerns constructively. They also accelerated the deployment of data dashboards that would make service patterns visible in real time, providing objective evidence to counter subjective resistance. By the time Amara delivered her final conference presentation and prepared to return home, the Respect in Flight initiative had weathered its first major challenge and emerged stronger. The leaked documents intended to derail their progress had instead catalyzed greater transparency, clearer communication, and more direct engagement with both employees and passengers. The sabotage had failed. But as Amara reminded Alexander during their flight home, the broader struggle continued. Changing deeply ingrained patterns of behavior and assumption would require sustained effort, consistent accountability, and ongoing vigilance against both open resistance and subtle subversion. "This is a marathon, not a sprint," she said, as their plane began its descent. "And we've only just begun." 3 weeks after the sabotage attempt, Amara returned to Geneva to observe the first full-scale training session for Global Elite's senior cabin crew supervisors. The elegant conference room at the airline's training center had been transformed into an interactive learning space with small group tables arranged in a semicircle and digital displays showing real-time data on passenger experiences. Luis Mendez opened the session with remarkable poise, considering half the participants had vocally opposed the initiative when it was first announced. "Welcome to Day 1 of the Respect in Flight Supervisor Training," he began. "We're here to examine how we deliver service, identify inconsistencies in that delivery, and develop tools to ensure every passenger receives the excellence they've paid for." Amara observed from the back of the room as Luis skillfully navigated the initial resistance. He didn't lecture about discrimination or bias in the abstract. Instead, he showed them their own data patterns of complaints, seat reassignments, and service discrepancies that couldn't be explained by any factor other than passenger demographics. "These aren't opinions," Luis emphasized, highlighting a particularly stark disparity. "These are your numbers from your flights reported through your systems." The shift in the room was subtle but perceptible. Facts were harder to dismiss than accusations. Data created a foundation for discussion that emotional appeals couldn't achieve. As the day progressed, Amara noticed Sophia Whitfield, the flight attendant who had confronted her at the cabin door, sitting at the far table. She had been surprised to learn Sophia was participating in the pilot training. Victoria had explained that rather than terminating her immediately, they had offered her a choice: participate fully in the reform process or accept termination. Unexpectedly, Sophia had chosen to participate. During a small group exercise about service consistency, Sophia remained quiet while her colleagues debated hypothetical scenarios. When finally pressed for her opinion, she spoke hesitantly. "I've always believed I provided excellent service," she said, eyes fixed on the table rather than meeting anyone's gaze. "But looking at these patterns, I can see there were assumptions I made about who belonged and who didn't. Assumptions I didn't even recognize as assumptions." The admission, however reluctant, created an opening for others to acknowledge similar behaviors. One by one, supervisors began sharing examples of differential treatment they had either practiced or witnessed, subtle but significant differences in tone, attention, and benefit of the doubt given to different passengers. By afternoon, the energy in the room had transformed from defensive resistance to cautious engagement. Luis introduced objective service metrics designed to track consistency across passenger demographics, emphasizing that the goal wasn't punitive monitoring but rather providing tools for self-correction. "This isn't about catching people doing wrong," he explained. "It's about creating systems where doing right becomes the default regardless of who you're serving." As the session concluded, Amara spoke briefly with Luis about his impressions. "It's going better than I expected," he admitted. "The data is making the difference. It's hard to argue with your own numbers." Over the next month, the training program expanded to include all first-class cabin crews, then business class, and finally the entire customer-facing workforce. Global Elite deployed anonymous auditors on flights passengers of diverse backgrounds, specifically tasked with evaluating service consistency and reporting their experiences. The initial results were mixed, but revealing. Some flights showed immediate improvement with crews consciously applying their training to ensure consistent service. Others demonstrated persistent disparities, particularly on routes where crews had longer tenure and more ingrained habits. Amara reviewed these findings with Luis and Victoria during their weekly strategy call. "We need to identify the factors that are facilitating success on some routes and hindering it on others," she suggested. "It's not enough to know where disparities persist. We need to understand why they persist in some contexts more than others." They adjusted the training approach, adding route-specific modules that addressed particular challenges and resistance points. They paired high-performing crews with those showing less progress, creating peer mentorship opportunities. They refined feedback mechanisms to provide more immediate and actionable guidance. 4 weeks into implementation, an unexpected opportunity emerged. Sophia Whitfield requested a meeting with Amara, a development that surprised everyone involved in the initiative. They met in a private room at Global Elite's Geneva office, the tension palpable as they sat across from each other for the first time since the confrontation that had catalyzed the entire process. "Thank you for agreeing to see me." Sophia began, her composure professional but her discomfort evident. "I wanted to speak with you directly rather than through HR or the training team." Amara nodded, waiting for her to continue. "When this all started, I was angry," Sophia admitted. "I felt singled out for doing what I thought was my job protecting the first-class experience. I didn't see what I did as discrimination. I saw it as maintaining standards." She paused, gathering her thoughts. "The training sessions changed that. Seeing the patterns in black and white, hearing similar stories from colleagues, examining my own assumptions, it forced me to recognize that what I called standards were often just biases dressed up in professional language. Amara remained silent, allowing Sophia the space to articulate her realization without interruption. "I'm not here to ask for special treatment," Sophia continued. "I accept the consequences of my actions, but I am here to tell you that I understand now what happened, and I'm committed to changing not just my behavior, but helping to change the culture that shaped it." "What specifically are you proposing?" Amara asked, her tone neutral but not cold. "I'd like to become a program advocate," Sophia replied. "To speak candidly with my colleagues about my own journey from resistance to understanding. Many of them respect my experience and would listen to me in ways they might not listen to outside trainers." Amara considered the request carefully. There was strategic value in having a former resistor become a visible advocate, but it would only work if Sophia's transformation was genuine rather than performative. "Why should I believe your change of heart is sincere?" Amara asked directly. Sophia met her gaze steadily. "You shouldn't based on a single conversation. Judge me by my actions going forward. All I'm asking for is the opportunity to demonstrate that commitment through concrete contributions to the program." After further discussion, Amara agreed to a trial period. Sophia would work with Luis to develop peer-to-peer training modules focused on recognizing and addressing the specific forms of bias most common among cabin crews. Her contributions would be closely monitored, and her role would expand only if her actions consistently matched her stated commitment. The decision proved surprisingly effective. Sophia's insider perspective helped identify resistance tactics and evasions that outside observers might have missed. Her willingness to acknowledge her own past behaviors created space for others to do the same without defensive posturing. Within weeks, she had become an unexpectedly valuable asset to the implementation team. During a particularly challenging training session with senior crew members from long-haul Asian routes, Sophia intervened when resistance threatened to derail the entire discussion. "I understand exactly why you're pushing back," she told her colleagues. "I did the same thing. I told myself I was maintaining standards, protecting the first-class experience, ensuring the right atmosphere for premium passengers. I believed all of that." She paused, making eye contact with the most vocal resistors. "But when I actually examined my decisions, who I questioned, who I scrutinized, who I gave the benefit of the doubt, the patterns were undeniable. And once I saw those patterns, I couldn't unsee them. I had to decide whether I wanted to be someone who knowingly perpetuated discrimination or someone who had the courage to change." The intervention shifted the dynamic in the room, allowing the training to proceed with greater receptivity. It became a template for addressing resistance in subsequent sessions with Sophia, playing an increasingly central role in the peer-to-peer components of the program. By the 2-month mark, the initiative had trained over 60% of Global Elite's customer-facing staff. Early data showed promising improvements in service consistency with significant reductions in complaints related to discriminatory treatment. Customer satisfaction scores remained stable in first and business class, while showing slight improvements in economy evidence that extending respectful service to all passengers didn't diminish the premium experience. Real-world testing continued through anonymous auditors who evaluated service across passenger demographics. These audits revealed both progress and persistent challenges. While overt discrimination had decreased dramatically, subtler forms of differential treatment remained differences in tone, attention, and responsiveness that might be imperceptible individually but formed clear patterns when aggregated. Amara discussed these findings with Alexander during one of their regular strategy dinners, this time at their home rather than a hotel restaurant. "We're seeing meaningful progress," she noted, reviewing the latest data. "But there's still significant work to do on the subtler forms of bias." "That's to be expected," Alexander replied. "Changing explicit behaviors is relatively straightforward. Changing implicit assumptions and habitual responses is much harder.
Which is why we need to adjust our approach, Amara suggested. The initial training focused on raising awareness and changing visible behaviors. Now we need to address the underlying mindsets that drive those subtler disparities.
They refined the training modules, adding components specifically focused on recognizing and correcting implicit bias in real-time service interactions. They adjusted the anonymous auditing protocols to capture more nuanced aspects of the passenger experience. They created additional feedback loops so crews could receive specific, actionable guidance rather than generic reminders. Sophia's evolution from resistor to advocate continued to surprise everyone involved in the initiative. During a review meeting with Jonathan Walsh, she spoke with unexpected candor about the cultural factors that had shaped her initial behavior. "We were never explicitly told to discriminate," she explained. "But we were taught to value certain passenger profiles over others. We were rewarded for maintaining the first-class atmosphere, which meant keeping out people who didn't fit our mental image of who belonged. It was discrimination hiding behind euphemisms about quality and standards." Jonathan listened with visible discomfort but didn't interrupt or defend. When Sophia finished speaking, he acknowledged his own responsibility for allowing that culture to develop and persist. "This is exactly why the initiative is so necessary," he said, addressing the entire implementation team. "Not because of a single incident, but because we've allowed these patterns to become normalized. I'm committed to changing that no matter how difficult or uncomfortable the process might be." Whether his commitment was genuine or political remained to be seen, but his public support reinforced the initiative's legitimacy and created additional pressure for meaningful change. As the third month of implementation began, Global Elite faced its first public test of progress. A passenger situation arose on a flight from London to Dubai that closely paralleled Amara's experience. A black woman in casual attire was questioned about her first-class ticket by a crew member who had not yet completed the respect in flight training. Unlike Amara's experience, however, another crew member who had completed the training immediately intervened, ensuring the passenger was treated with respect and seated without further incident. The passenger later commended the airline for the prompt correction, posting positively about the experience on social media. The incident, while initially concerning, ultimately demonstrated that the initiative was already creating meaningful change, not just in official policies, but in the day-to-day behavior of staff who had internalized its principles. When Amara and Luis discussed this outcome during their weekly review, both recognized it as a significant milestone. "That's exactly what success looks like," Luis observed. "Not preventing all incidents of bias, but ensuring they're recognized and corrected quickly when they do occur. And creating a culture where staff feel empowered to intervene when they see problematic behavior," Amara added. The work continued with adjustments and refinements based on ongoing feedback and results. Each week brought new challenges and new signs of progress. The path wasn't linear or simple, but the direction was clear and consistent toward a culture where respect wasn't contingent on appearance or assumption, where excellence meant excellent service for everyone. By the end of the third month, as the implementation reached its halfway point, Global Elite had transformed from a company in crisis to an emerging industry leader in inclusive service. The initiative that had begun with a single confrontation at a cabin door was now reshaping not just one airline but setting new standards for the entire industry. And Sophia Whitfield, once the face of discrimination, had become one of the most effective advocates for change, proving that transformation was possible not just for institutions but for the individuals within them. The email arrived on a Tuesday morning as Amara reviewed the latest implementation data from her home office. The sender was Dr. Elise Fournier, Director of Economic Development Programs at the United Nations. Dear Dr. Okafor, I am pleased to inform you that after an extensive search process, you have been selected as our top candidate for the position of Chief Economic Advisor for our Sustainable Development Initiative in Geneva. Your exceptional work in development economics, combined with your recent demonstration of institutional change leadership at Global Elite Airlines, makes you uniquely qualified for this role. The position would commence in 4 weeks, requiring your relocation to Geneva for an initial 2-year appointment. Please contact me at your earliest convenience to discuss details and next steps. Congratulations, Dr. Elise Fournier. Amara read the email twice, emotions conflicting as she absorbed its significance. This was the opportunity she had been working toward for years, a chance to shape economic policy at a global level to implement the theories and approaches she had developed throughout her academic career. Under normal circumstances, she would have accepted immediately. But these weren't normal circumstances. The Respect in Flight initiative was at a critical juncture, showing promising results, but still requiring consistent leadership to maintain momentum against persistent resistance. Leaving now could jeopardize everything they'd built over the past 3 months. She called Alexander, who was in meetings at Pinnacle Holdings headquarters. "I need to talk to you when you have a moment," she said, her tone conveying the importance without elaboration. "I'll be home by 7, he promised. "Everything okay?" "Yes, just complicated. We'll talk tonight." She spent the day reviewing the UN position description, researching the specific development programs she would oversee, and assessing the initiative's current status. By the time Alexander returned home, she had organized her thoughts and concerns. Over dinner, she showed him the email and outlined her dilemma. "This is the opportunity I've been working toward for years," she explained. "The chance to apply my research at scale to influence economic policy for developing regions globally." Alexander nodded understanding immediately. "But you're concerned about leaving the initiative at this stage." "Exactly. We've made significant progress, but it's still vulnerable. The cultural shift isn't fully embedded yet. If leadership falters or priorities change, we could lose everything we've built." Alexander considered this thoughtfully. "What's your assessment of Luis's capacity to lead the initiative without your direct involvement?" "He's exceptional," Amara replied without hesitation. "Skilled, committed, and increasingly confident. But he still faces internal resistance that my association with you helps overcome. And if we formalized his authority, elevated his position within the organizational structure." Amara considered this possibility. That could work especially if combined with explicit, visible support from you and the board. They discussed options late into the evening, ways to ensure the initiative's continuity, while allowing Amara to pursue this career-defining opportunity. By midnight, they had outlined a potential transition plan, but Amara remained uncertain. "I need to speak with Luis directly," she decided. "This affects him most directly, and his perspective matters." The following morning, she arranged to meet Luis for coffee at a quiet cafe near Global Elite's offices. After updating him on the initiative's latest metrics, she shared the UN offer and her concerns about timing. Luis listened attentively, his expression thoughtful. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment before responding. "First, congratulations," he said sincerely. "This position is perfectly aligned with your expertise and passion." "Thank you," Amara acknowledged. "But I'm concerned about the initiative's vulnerability if I step away now." "I understand that concern," Luis replied, "but I think you should accept the position." Amara was surprised by his certainty. "You do?" "Yes, for several reasons," Luis explained. "First, the initiative has strong foundations, now clear metrics, established processes, and growing institutional support. Second, your departure would actually be a healthy test of its sustainability. If it can only succeed with your direct involvement, then it's not truly embedded in the organization." He leaned forward, his expression earnest. "Most importantly, you've done the critical work of breaking through initial resistance and establishing legitimacy. The path forward is clearer now. I believe I can lead the implementation phase effectively, especially with continued structural support from Alexander and the board." Amara considered his perspective. "You'd face challenges I don't, particularly from those who resent your promotion or resist your authority." "Undoubtedly," Luis agreed. But that's part of the work. And frankly, as a Hispanic man who's been fighting for inclusion at this company for years, I'm well practiced in navigating resistance. His confidence was reassuring, but Amara needed more than reassurance. What would you need to succeed? Be specific. Luis outlined his requirements without hesitation. Formal elevation to Vice President of Inclusive Excellence, reporting directly to the board rather than through normal management channels, dedicated budget and staffing, explicit support from Alexander and Eleanor Blackwood, and continued access to Amara as a consultant and advisor even after she relocated to Geneva. With those elements in place, he concluded, I'm confident I can lead this successfully. Amara promised to consider everything they'd discussed and consult further with Alexander and the board before making her decision. That evening, she and Alexander refined the transition plan based on Luis's input. Alexander was supportive of her accepting the UN position provided they could establish the necessary structures to ensure the initiative's continued success. This isn't an either-or situation, he pointed out. You can pursue this opportunity while maintaining a connection to the initiative in an advisory capacity.
Amara nodded, the path forward becoming clearer. We'd need a formal transition period at least 4 weeks, where I'm still primarily focused on the initiative while beginning to prepare for the UN role.
Absolutely, Alexander agreed. And we should formalize Luis's new position immediately with a public announcement of the succession plan to prevent any perception of abandonment. They continued developing the plan, addressing potential challenges and establishing safeguards. By the time they finished, Amara felt more confident that a responsible transition was possible, one that would allow her to pursue this significant opportunity without undermining the important work they'd begun at Global Elite. The next day, she arranged a video conference with Elise Fournier to discuss the UN position in more detail and explore flexibility in the start date. The conversation was productive with Elise, understanding Amara's commitment to ensuring a smooth transition at Global Elite. We can adjust the start date by up to 6 weeks, Elise offered, and we're open to a phased transition where you initially split time between Geneva and your current responsibilities. This flexibility removed one of the major obstacles to accepting the position. With a longer runway for transition and the option for a gradual shift of responsibilities, Amara could ensure the initiative remained stable while beginning her new role. With this assurance, she scheduled a meeting with Eleanor Blackwood to discuss Luis's elevation and the broader transition plan. Eleanor, pragmatic, as always, focused on concrete arrangements rather than emotions. Luis Mendez has proven himself capable and committed, she acknowledged. I support his promotion to vice president, reporting directly to the board, but we'll need to be explicit about his authority and our expectations. They drafted a formal charter for the new role detailing responsibilities, reporting structures, and success metrics. Eleanor suggested quarterly reviews for the first year to ensure the initiative maintained momentum through the transition and beyond. And your continued involvement, even at a distance, will be crucial, Eleanor added. Perhaps a formal advisory role with scheduled consultations? Amara agreed, grateful for Eleanor's practical approach to addressing her concerns. With the board chair's support secured, the next step was formalizing the arrangement with Jonathan Walsh and the executive team. That meeting proved more challenging as Jonathan initially resisted Luis's elevation. Creating a vice president position outside the normal organizational structure sets a problematic precedent, he argued. It's a necessary precedent, Alexander countered. This initiative requires independence from the very structures it's designed to transform. After considerable discussion, Jonathan reluctantly agreed to the arrangement, though his concerns about authority and reporting lines remained evident. Amara noted his resistance but chose not to address it directly in the meeting. Instead, she focused on finalizing the practical details of the transition. With the formal arrangements secured, Amara spoke again with Luis to confirm his willingness to accept the expanded role and its challenges. His commitment remained unwavering. This is the opportunity I've been working toward since I joined Global Elite,
he told her. The chance to drive meaningful change rather than just advocating for it from the sidelines. It won't be easy, Amara warned, especially after I'm no longer directly involved. I know, Luis acknowledged, but nothing worthwhile ever is.
With all the key elements in place, Luis's willingness to lead structural support from Alexander and the board, flexibility from the UN regarding start dates, and a clear transition plan, Amara made her decision. She would accept the UN position while ensuring a responsible handover of the initiative to Luis. She composed her acceptance email to Elise Fournier, confirming her interest in the position and outlining her proposed transition timeline. The response came quickly, confirming the adjusted start date and expressing enthusiasm about Amara joining the team. That evening, Amara and Alexander celebrated the decision with a quiet dinner at home. The path forward now clear, they could acknowledge both the excitement of the new opportunity and the importance of ensuring the initiative's continued success. "Are you sure about this?" Alexander asked one final time. "You've invested so much in the initiative." "I am," Amara confirmed, "because ultimately this was never about me leading the change. It was about creating change that could sustain itself beyond any individual leader." Alexander raised his glass. "To new beginnings, then, and to lasting change." Amara clinked her glass against his. "To both." The following weeks were a whirlwind of preparation and transition. Amara worked closely with Luis to ensure he was fully prepared for independent leadership. They reviewed ongoing projects, discussed strategy for addressing persistent resistance, and established regular check-in protocols for after her departure. They announced the transition formally, first to the implementation team, then to Global Elite's broader leadership, and finally to all employees through a company-wide communication. The announcement emphasized continuity and commitment rather than change or departure. Luis's elevation to vice president was presented as a natural progression of the initiative's increasing importance to the company's future. Amara's ongoing advisory role was highlighted to reinforce that she wasn't abandoning the work, but rather expanding her impact while maintaining her connection to Global Elite's transformation. Reactions were mixed, but generally positive. The implementation team expressed both congratulations for Amara and confidence in Luis's leadership. Some executives who had resisted the initiative saw an opportunity in Amara's transition, hoping Luis might be more easily influenced or controlled. Others recognized the structural protections put in place and adapted their expectations accordingly. As the transition progressed, Amara began preparing for her UN role, researching current projects, connecting with future colleagues, and developing initial priorities for her first months in the position. She arranged for their Geneva apartment to be reopened and refreshed, having been maintained but unused since their last extended stay in the city. The final test of the transition plan came unexpectedly when Amara took a Global Elite flight to Geneva for preliminary meetings with the UN team. It was her first time flying the airline since the original incident, and she was curious to see whether the changes they'd been measuring in data would be visible in the actual passenger experience. She booked her ticket under her professional name, rather than Reynolds choosing not to leverage Alexander's connection. She dressed simply, much as she had on that first flight, and arrived at the gate without fanfare or special treatment. The difference was immediately apparent. The boarding process was efficient and respectful for all passengers. The cabin crew greeted each person with consistent courtesy, regardless of appearance or attire. The service throughout the flight maintained the same standard of excellence for everyone, without the subtle disparities that had been so common before. Most tellingly, when a young black woman in casual clothes boarded for first class, she was welcomed warmly without the skepticism or extra scrutiny that would have been automatic 3 months earlier. The change wasn't perfect. Amara noticed moments of hesitation or uncertainty from crew members still developing new habits, but the improvement was undeniable. As the plane began its descent into Geneva, Amara felt a sense of accomplishment tinged with responsibility. They had made significant progress, but the work was far from complete. The cultural shift was underway but not yet fully embedded. The structures they'd built were strong but would require ongoing maintenance and reinforcement. And now, as she prepared to step into a new role with global impact, she carried both the lessons and the obligations of what they had begun at Global Elite. The UN position would allow her to apply her expertise at a larger scale, addressing economic inequities that created and reinforced other forms of discrimination and exclusion. But she would remain connected to the airline's transformation, not just through formal advisory meetings, but through the personal commitment she'd made to seeing this change through regardless of her official role or physical location. As the wheels touched down on the Geneva runway, Amara thought about the journey that had brought her here, from that confrontation at the cabin door to the comprehensive initiative it had sparked, from challenging individual behaviors to transforming institutional culture. It hadn't been the path she'd expected, but it had led to possibilities she might not have discovered otherwise. And as she prepared to disembark, she felt ready for both the opportunities and challenges that lay ahead. 4 weeks later, Amara stood at the window of her Geneva office, watching snow fall gently over the city. The United Nations complex sprawled around her, its buildings housing experts and diplomats working on global challenges from climate change to poverty reduction to human rights. Her own office reflected her recent transition, still partially unpacked boxes alongside neatly arranged research materials. A family photo on the desk next to stacks of briefing documents on economic development projects across 3 continents. On the wall hung a single framed article, the announcement of the Respect in Flight initiative, a reminder of the unexpected journey that had led her here. Her phone chimed with a calendar notification 15 minutes until her weekly video call with Luis. These consultations had become an essential anchor during her transition, providing continuity for the initiative while allowing her to focus primarily on her new responsibilities. She settled at her desk and opened her laptop, reviewing the latest data Luis had sent in preparation for their call. The numbers were encouraging continued improvement in service consistency across passenger demographics, increased reporting of potential issues by staff, positive feedback from the anonymous auditing program. When Luis's face appeared on screen, his expression confirmed the positive trends. "Good morning from New York," he greeted her. "Or good afternoon from Geneva, I should say." "Good afternoon," Amara replied with a smile. "The data looks promising." "Very," Luis agreed. "We've now trained over 90% of customer-facing staff, and the metrics show consistent improvement across all service categories." They discussed specific developments, the expansion of the training program to include new hires, refinements to the data collection methods, successful intervention in several potential incidents before they escalated. Luis had grown noticeably more confident in his leadership role, navigating challenges with increasing skill and authority. "What about resistance?" Amara asked, knowing this remained their most significant ongoing challenge. "Still present, but evolving," Luis reported. "The overt opposition has largely subsided. Now we're dealing more with passive resistance, people who verbally support the initiative while finding subtle ways to undermine or circumvent it." "That's actually progress," Amara noted. "When opposition goes from explicit to implicit, it usually means the cultural norm is shifting. Open resistance becomes socially costly." They discussed strategies for addressing this next layer of challenges, more granular metrics, peer accountability, systems recognition programs for positive change agents. Luis had innovative ideas that built on their initial framework while adapting to evolving circumstances. "You're doing exceptional work," Amara told him sincerely. "The initiative is clearly thriving under your leadership." Luis looked pleased but remained focused on the work ahead. "We're making progress, but sustainability is still my primary concern. How do we ensure these changes become permanent rather than dependent on constant vigilance?" "That's exactly the right question," Amara affirmed. "And it's why our next phase needs to focus on institutional embedding, making these practices so integral to Global Elite's operations that reverting to old patterns would be more disruptive than maintaining the new ones." They continued strategizing until Luis needed to leave for a board presentation. Before ending the call, he shared one final update. Sophia Whitfield has been formally appointed as training director for the initiative. Her personal transformation story has been remarkably effective in reaching resistant staff members. Amara nodded, still somewhat surprised by Sophia's evolution from antagonist to advocate. Sometimes our strongest allies come from unexpected places. After the call ended, Amara had a few minutes before her next meeting a briefing on agricultural development projects in East Africa. She used the time to send Alexander a quick message updating him on the initiative's progress and confirming their dinner plans for his upcoming Geneva visit. His response came almost immediately. "Not surprising that it's thriving. You built it to last, not just to look good temporarily. See you Friday. Love you." The simple affirmation warmed her as she gathered her materials for the agricultural briefing. In the 3 weeks since starting her UN position, she'd immersed herself in complex development challenges across multiple regions, from sustainable farming practices to microfinance programs to infrastructure development in rural communities. The work was demanding but deeply fulfilling, allowing her to apply her expertise to improving economic opportunities for those most marginalized by existing systems. Each day brought new challenges and possibilities, engaging her mind and heart in ways that reinforced she'd made the right decision in accepting this role. And yet she remained connected to the transformation at Global Elite, not just through scheduled consultations, but through the principles and approaches that informed her work in both contexts. The skills required to change an airline's culture translated surprisingly well to reshaping economic development paradigms. Both required identifying structural patterns that perpetuated inequality. Both demanded data-driven approaches rather than assumptions or good intentions. Both necessitated both accountability and patience, recognizing that meaningful change happened, neither instantly nor without consistent effort. As Amara headed to her briefing, she reflected on how her unexpected confrontation at a cabin door had catalyzed not just an airline's transformation, but a personal and professional journey she couldn't have anticipated. 1 year later, Amara stood at a podium in Global Elite's headquarters preparing to address the company's annual leadership conference. Behind her, a screen displayed the official 1-year results of the Respect in Flight initiative, comprehensive data showing dramatic improvements in service consistency, complaint reduction, and employee engagement. The audience before her represented every level of the company's leadership, from board members and executives to frontline supervisors. Alexander sat in the front row beside Eleanor Blackwood. Luis Mendez, now firmly established as Vice President of Inclusive Excellence, stood nearby ready to join her for the Q&A session following her presentation. 1 year ago, Amara began, Global Elite faced a choice to treat a public incident as a PR problem requiring damage control, or to recognize it as evidence of deeper institutional patterns requiring meaningful change. You chose the latter, more challenging path. She continued acknowledging both the progress made and the work still ahead. She highlighted key milestones, the comprehensive training program that had now reached every employee, the data systems that provided real-time feedback on service consistency, the accountability mechanisms that had shifted from reactive to proactive intervention. The results speak for themselves, she noted, directing attention to the screen behind her. Passenger complaints related to discriminatory treatment have decreased by 87%. Service consistency metrics show no statistically significant variations based on passenger demographics. Employee reporting of potential issues has increased by 240%, reflecting a culture where addressing problems is valued rather than punished. She paused, allowing these achievements to register. But numbers, however impressive, tell only part of the story. The real transformation is in the daily experiences of both passengers and employees, the consistent dignity and respect that have become standard rather than exceptional. After completing her formal presentation, Amara invited Luis to join her for questions from the audience. He stepped forward confidently, his position and authority now firmly established within the organization. The questions ranged from technical inquiries about specific metrics to broader concerns about maintaining momentum as the initiative moved from transformation to sustainability. Throughout, Luis demonstrated both mastery of the details and clarity about the ongoing vision evidence of how fully he had assumed leadership of the initiative. When Sophia Whitfield raised her hand from the middle of the audience, Amara nodded for her to proceed. "Dr. Okafor?" Sophia began, her tone professional but with an undercurrent of emotion. "When you first announced this initiative, many of us, myself included, saw it as punitive rather than transformative. We expected to be vilified rather than engaged. What made you choose a path of institutional change rather than individual punishment?" The question created a moment of heightened attention throughout the room. Amara considered her response carefully. "Because punishment might have addressed the symptom but not the cause," she replied. "What happened to me wasn't about 2 flight attendants making bad decisions in isolation. It was about a culture that made those decisions seem reasonable and appropriate." Changing the culture was always the goal, not punishing individuals who were in many ways simply acting according to the norms they'd been taught. Sophia nodded, visibly moved by the response. "Thank you. Your approach created space for people like me to learn and change rather than just defend or deny." As the Q&A continued, Amara observed the dynamics in the room, the genuine engagement from leaders who had initially been skeptical or resistant, the pride among those who had championed the initiative from the beginning, the collaborative spirit that had replaced the defensive posturing of the early implementation period. When the session concluded, Jonathan Walsh approached her. His initial resistance to the initiative had gradually evolved into genuine, if sometimes awkward, support. "Dr. Okafor," he greeted her, extending his hand. "Thank you for returning for this milestone. Your insights remain invaluable." "Thank you for continuing to support the initiative," she replied, shaking his hand. "Luis speaks highly of your engagement over the past 6 months." Jonathan nodded, looking somewhat embarrassed. "It's been educational. I've had to confront assumptions I didn't realize I held. Not always comfortable, but necessary." His admission, however limited, reflected the broader cultural shift within the company from defensiveness and denial to acknowledgement and accountability. Not uniform or complete, but substantive and ongoing. Later that evening, Global Elite hosted a reception celebrating the initiative's first anniversary. The event brought together board members, executives, implementation team members, and frontline staff who had become particularly effective change agents within their departments. Amara circulated through the gathering, reconnecting with colleagues she hadn't seen since moving to Geneva and meeting newer team members who had joined the initiative after her departure. The conversations reflected both pride in what had been accomplished and commitment to the work still ahead. As the reception continued, Luis called for attention and raised his glass. "To Dr. Amara Okafor," he said, "who transformed a moment of injustice into a movement for lasting change." Glasses raised throughout the room. Amara acknowledged the toast with a nod and her own raised glass. "And to all of you," she responded, "who had the courage to examine difficult truths and the commitment to create meaningful change." The celebration continued, but Amara stepped away briefly to the quiet of a nearby balcony. Alexander joined her a moment later, standing beside her as they looked out over the city lights. "Proud of what you started?" he asked quietly. "Proud of what we all built together," she corrected, "and grateful it's continuing to grow beyond my direct involvement." "That's the true measure of successful change," Alexander observed, "when it becomes self-sustaining rather than dependent on its initial catalyst." Amara nodded in agreement. "That was always the goal, not just addressing what happened to me, but creating systems and practices that would prevent similar experiences for countless others." They stood in comfortable silence for a moment, watching the city below and the stars above. "Your UN work is going well?" Alexander asked, though they spoke almost daily, and he knew the answer. Very, Amara confirmed. We're developing new approaches to economic inclusion across multiple regions. Different context, similar principles identifying structural barriers, establishing clear metrics, creating accountability systems. The skills transfer, Alexander noted. Exactly, Amara agreed. Whether it's an airline or an economic development program, meaningful change requires similar foundations: clear vision, consistent values, persistent effort. As they prepared to return to the reception, Amara paused for one final moment of reflection. A year earlier, she had stood at a cabin door facing discrimination that was both personal and institutional. Now she stood at the intersection of two powerful roles, UN Economic Advisor and Transformation Catalyst, both allowing her to address structural inequities at different scales and in different contexts. The path had been unexpected, challenging, and ultimately transformative, not just for Global Elite Airlines, but for everyone involved in the journey, including Amara herself. As she and Alexander rejoined the celebration, she carried that awareness with her, the recognition that sometimes our most significant opportunities emerge from our most difficult challenges if we have the courage to transform them from individual grievances into collective progress. The Respect in Flight initiative would continue evolving under Luis's capable leadership. Amara's UN work would expand to address economic inequities across multiple regions. And the principles that connected these efforts, dignity, respect, accountability, and opportunity for all, would continue guiding both endeavors, creating ripples of change far beyond that initial confrontation at a first-class cabin door. What began as a moment of discrimination at 36,000 feet transformed into a catalyst for sweeping change across an entire organization, Dr. Amara Okafor's courage standing firm in the face of bias and then channeling that experience into institutional transformation reminds us that meaningful progress often begins with a single person refusing to accept injustice as inevitable. The journey from confrontation to resolution demonstrates that real change requires more than individual accountability or public statements. It demands examination of the underlying systems that enable discrimination, creation of new structures that promote equity, and consistent commitment to measuring progress rather than assuming good intentions are enough. If this story resonates with you, remember that transforming spaces where exclusion has been normalized isn't just the responsibility of those who experience discrimination. It requires all of us, whether we hold formal power like Alexander or witness injustice like Miguel, to recognize our role in either maintaining or challenging the status quo. Because in the end, dignity and respect shouldn't be luxury amenities available only to some. They should be the standard service we all receive, regardless of how we look, what we wear, or any other characteristic unrelated to our humanity. If you found this story inspiring, please hit the like button and subscribe to our channel for more powerful content that challenges us all to create more inclusive spaces. Share this video with someone who needs to hear this message today. Together, we can transform moments of injustice into movements for lasting change.